What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto wins a girl in a bet? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. It was a nice, inauspicious day. Vendors prepared their merchandise in the markets, and early duty shinobi raced across rooftops, all enjoying the warm summer breeze oblivious to the terror that would shortly begin. The day would be remembered as one of the 3 times Konoha was declared no man's land by the other shinobi nations, the first being the disastrous chain reaction caused by the first Tora mission, and the second being the day Maida Guy discovered green spandex. But presently, there was no inkling of the doom that would soon befall the peaceful village. Oddly enough, the catastrophe of a day began with a single event. Ino Yamanaka had finally convinced, blackmailed, Naruto into helping her find clothes for a date. Considering the Yamanaka heiress's history with men and all-around acknowledged allure, it wasn't odd for her to be preparing for a date with her chosen victim. What was odd was the company she had chosen to drag along for her wild shopping spree. Since the blonde war hero was a die-hard tomboy that wore an eyesore of an orange jumpsuit, it begs the question of Ino's sanity that she would bring this particular companion along for a shopping spree of all things. Looking at their opposing interests, they shouldn't even have been friends. Though they hadn't gotten along during their academy days, what with Naruto being too busy pulling pranks on her poor academy sensei and Ino's disgust of the prankster's fashion choice along with other distractions, a certain duck-butt-haired boy to be exact, times had changed. After Naruto had returned from her training trip with Jiraiya, they had become, if not friends, at least friendly acquaintances considering the Rookie Nine's semi-regular lunch get-togethers. The Fourth Shinobi War had only strengthened these tentative bonds, and though the blondes were very different, they had found mutual ground in their pride as kunoichi. A shared hidden love for all things icha also helped, although that was not public knowledge. So it wasn't odd to see Ino and Naruto together, but it certainly was an experience to see the fondly named Orange Menace crammed into a variety of girly dresses, skirts, and blouses while Ino cackled ominously at sale prices. Though they were contributing factors, it wasn't just out of feminine solidarity or the pleasure of seeing the disgruntled tomboy actually acting like a girl that Ino had arranged this outing, however. No, Ino had a plan. A brilliantly simple plan to get the inside scoop necessary to win the bet, and the glorious wealth that came with it. Shopping trips are expensive, you know. The originations of the bet are unclear, though rumors suggest that it began after the Chunin invasion, while others even suggest after the infamous Wave mission. Regardless of its beginnings, the once small betting pool believed to have been started by the Sandaime himself had evolved into a global phenomenon. Participants ranging from virtually all of Konoha, the majority of shinobi from every village, and even a few travelers from the outer continents. Rumors say that even the Raikage, with his well-known hate of gambling, had deigned to join the bet, though that was highly improbable. Over the years of the bet's growth, numerous contenders had been added as new intel came to light, and the current pot for the winners had reached daimyo levels of wealth. Funnily enough, the fire, lightning, and hot water daimyo were actually participants of the bet. So what could this mythical bet be, that the winners could become some of the richest alive, their names famous for years to come as the victors? The bet was who Naruto would confess to and eventually end up with. Though it may seem ridiculous, the participants of the bet never treated it like a joke. The betting pool that was once small because of the demon cantainer's previous unpopularity had expanded exponentially with her accomplishments and newfound popularity. It certainly helped as well that though the blonde in question was a tomboy to the core who wouldn't know fashion sense if it Ross Engined her in the face, she had grown to be beautiful. Of middling height at 168 centimeters, with a shapely body, a mischievous smile, bright blue eyes, and short blonde hair as fluffy as any dandelion, Naruto had admirers aplenty. But it wasn't who she had ensnared with her loud brand of charm over the years that mattered, it was who had managed to charm the self-proclaimed most unpredictable shinobi that would determine who became the wealthiest men or women alive. All contenders had stringent loyalists, who had various intel proving their contender was the one, and many shinobi over the years had attempted to guide Naruto to their candidate choice. The Raikage was said to have only allowed the training trip between Killer Bee and Naruto as a way to guide the outcome of the bet, but that was most likely hearsay. But regardless of mounting evidence for various contenders, No ultimate victor was forthcoming, and Naruto's love life continued to lack to the dismay of many. Cue the machinations of one self-styled matchmaking extraordinaire, Ino Yamanaka. As a self-proclaimed guru in all things love, Ino knew that she of all people would be capable of cracking the impenetrable nut, or in this case, Hokage to be, and sniff out the information necessary for the ultimate victory. So great was her drive to out the truth that Ino had turned up her nose at the unwritten rules of the bet. Make sure Naruto doesn't find out, no foul play to speed up the outcome, and no sabotaging possible contenders. Which brings us back to the ill-fated shopping trip. Currently, the blonde duo was browsing one of the more expensive clothing stores, and in particular, the dresses. Ino emerged from her fitting stall with a twirl, throwing her hands outwards as she posed before the disgruntled Naruto, who was currently testing the ability of the waiting chair to swallow her whole. So, Ino began, and gave another twirl of the knee-length purple dress for emphasis. What do you think? Naruto raised half-lidded eyes to Ino's sparkling ones, and mustered a pained smile that showed far too many teeth. It looks great, Ino. You're gonna knock that bastard onto his pale ass when he sees you. And if you don't really like this dress, you should just say so. I need some of the Uzumaki honesty. Why else would I make you come shopping with me? Ino finished, raising a questioning eyebrow at her fellow blonde. The pained smile and indignation brought about by the mention of Sai were immediately forgotten as Naruto frowned, a small wrinkle forming between her brows. Pretty sure it's not the Uzumaki honesty crap. You got more brutal honesty in Ya than the whole of the Rookie 9 put together. I actually don't know why you dragged me along. We both know I'm not what you would call girly. Naruto finished with a shudder. Oh pish posh, it doesn't matter why you're here, Ino exclaimed, ignoring Naruto's mutterings of, had to come. The mind-reading bitch has good blackmail material. This outing of ours is in the name of love, Ino crowed, throwing her hands together as though in prayer, eyes ascending to the shoddy dressing stall lights illuminating her with reverence befitting a master shrine maiden. Naruto raised a disbelieving eyebrow at Ino's display, and crossed her arms in apparent disapproval. Love or no love, Ya didn't need to drag me along for the ride or use you-know-what against me. We both know you're just gonna pick the most expensive dress in the store and call it good. A flash of confusion glazed Naruto's eyes, and she uncrossed her arms to bring a calloused hand to ponderously rub at her chin. Don't see why you'd waste the money on that pale shithead though. Sai's got as much appeal in him as a moldy sock. You would be better off dating Shino than that asshat. Ino pouted at Naruto's continued abuse of her date, and crossed her arms petulantly under her considerable bust. She also rolled her eyes at Naruto's second point. Shino was boring, unlike Sai, who was a incredible artist with a mysterious past. Yeah, no contest. She liked having fun with her dates, thank you very much. The pout Ino had sported soon faded into a devious smirk, however, and Naruto felt an ominous chill creep up her spine at the sight. With a quick jolt of her arm, Ino latched onto the collar of Naruto's orange coat and heaved her into the open changing room she had just exited. Naruto's indignant squawk went unheeded as Ino closed the door behind the orange-clad blonde. There's a blue dress in there, put it on, Ino called through the door. Furious banging and cursing was the Yamanaka's response as she leaned against the door to keep it closed. Come on Naruto, you wouldn't say no after I went through all the trouble to bring you along on this shopping trip. Taking the continued banging as the, let me out of this glorified closet you crazy shopaholic, that it was, Ino evened the odds. If you put on that dress and are for once a decent shopping buddy, I promise to never reveal that you right. Okay, I'll wear the dress. Just stop talking, and you better keep your word. The banging from within the stall ceased, though Ino heard in its place a variety of grumbles. UPID pupilless demon, her and her damn dresses. After a few tense minutes, the grumbles abated, and a hesitant knock came from within the stall. With a predatory smile, Ino stepped aside from the door while grabbing the handle, opening it in one fluid motion. A long moment later, Naruto emerged from her temporary prison with a heavy scowl clouding her face, but wearing considerably better attire than when she had entered. The light blue dress that Naruto wore had a modest neckline, halter strapped with an open upper back. Sky-colored fabric was comfortably snug around her bust, and faded into a darker blue laced with a flowery design that flowed to her knees, losing conformity as it drifted down. It wasn't an overly outspoken dress, but the astronomical change from Naruto's usual clothing made her seem a princess in comparison to her everyday self. Ino glided behind the tense form of her fellow blonde and placed her hands on Naruto's exposed shoulders, gently guiding her around the bend of the stalls to face the public mirror. Confronted with her new visage, Naruto had to do a double take, her jaw dropping slightly at the strange new sight in the mirror before her. "Look, Naruto," Ino began. "It's not just about buying expensive clothes, or even wearing girly clothing. It's about making an impression." At Ino's words, Naruto pulled her eyes away from her for once un-orange form and met Ino's gaze in the mirror. "I really want to look good for this date, because I think Sai could maybe be the one. That's not to say I don't look good all the time, because we both know I do," Ino drawled with a lazy smirk. "But I like to go that extra mile for when it matters. I know looks aren't everything, don't give me that look, I'm not that shallow. But I do think, as kunoichi, we should understand the importance of appearances and making an impact. These dresses are our armor, and they put our targets off balance. In the battle for love, I'll take any advantage I can get." Naruto maintained Ino's gaze, her eyes focused and considering. People didn't usually see this side of Naruto off the battlefield, so thoughtful and contemplative as compared to her usual prankster self. But Ino's words had drawn it out. Now was the time to strike. "Have you ever been in love, Naruto?" The shoulders beneath Ino's hands instantly tightened. "Have you ever felt like you were falling, the world rushing by into nothing when that special someone looks into your eyes? Have you tossed and turned at night, incapable of sleep because the cruelest of emotions has tied your head and heart in knots? And have you ever felt so alone, so cold and empty, that nothing feels like it can ever be bright or warm again?" And then they laughed, they smiled that smile, and suddenly the oblivion is history, and all that matters is the present you share with them. Leaning in close so her mouth was in line with Naruto's ear, Ino whispered, "Have you ever been in love?" Naruto was silent as the dead in response. But Ino was patient, and after long, lingering silence, Naruto's steely withdrawal cracked. "Yes, I am in love." Ino barely maintained composure in the face of this blatant admission, internally squealing with glee. She was almost there. That money was practically hers. "So," the Yamanaka appealed, "are you going to tell this love how you feel?" Naruto suddenly became interested in the details of her attire, and broke eye contact with Ino to stare down at her hands as they fiddled with the lacework of her dress. "He already knows how I feel. I've dropped enough hints to crush a damn cow, and he's not an idiot. He knows, but he's never going to acknowledge the truth of how I feel for him. Hell, I even wrote that to get his attention, and he still hasn't confronted me." Naruto's shoulders began to shake with faint tremors, emotions she had previously contained slipping through, her voice becoming louder and louder as she built up steam. "He's never going to see me the way I see him. He's acting like these feelings I have for him will go away if he ignores them, and I think he'll never return them because in his eyes, I'll always be that immature kid in the orange jumpsuit, yelling her dreams of being Hokage to the world." Ino was stunned as she watched Naruto, one of the strongest people she had ever met, crumple in on herself, glassy blue eyes staring sightlessly down to the floor while her hands drooped to her sides, no longer fidgeting. She was the image of defeat, and it broke something in Ino to see her friend this way. "That is bullshit," Ino hissed. With a quick jerk of her arms, she spun Naruto around so they were face to face, and once again planted her hands on her distraught friend's shoulders as she leaned in, bridging the distance between them. "Naruto, you are incredible. You have worked hard and earned every scrap of respect and happiness you now have. You are a strong, independent woman, and you don't need no man." With that final exclamation, Ino finished her tirade with a heavy breath, attempting to calm herself as Naruto stared back with wide eyes. Sadness momentarily forgotten as a quiet, "Whoa," left her lips. But Ino wasn't finished. After taking a second settling breath through her nose, Ino let out shaky exhale and continued once again, this time in a gentler tone. "You are the literal savior of the shinobi world, the Hokage to be, and the most unpredictable kunoichi. If he doesn't take you seriously, he's a real loser. But I think if you charge in and tell him how you feel," Ino whispered with a wry grin, "you'll make him acknowledge you. Dropping hints is good and all, but I think it's time for some of that Uzumaki honesty. Worst case scenario, he still turns you down. But at least you'll have given it that final shot, and you won't regret a single thing." So, Naruto, what are you waiting for? Ino demanded. Go give that moron a piece of your mind, and tell him how you feel. Naruto's eyes were reverent as she gazed back at her friend, and for the first time since entering the store, her signature grin stretched across her cheeks. I'm gonna make him acknowledge me, believe it. With a fist pumped to the air, Naruto completed the image of determination. However, an abashed grin took the place of her previously vibrant one, and her raised fist fell down to sheepishly scratch the back of her head. Sometime today, at least I gotta make sure I know what I'm gonna say first. With a resolved bob of her head, Naruto began to saunter towards the exit of the store, a happy blush decorating her cheeks as she fiddled with the hite-8 around her neck. Before she could finish her grand exit, she comically froze mid-stride, and pivoted on her heel. Thanks, Ino, she called back with a cheery grin. I really needed to hear that. It would have taken me forever to build up the courage to do this otherwise. After giving a boisterous wave to her newfound love guru, Naruto finally escaped the store, racing to who knows where, leaving a bemused Ino in her wake. The female clerk at the front desk blinked dazedly after the exiting blonde, and mumbled out, "Damn, Brad didn't even pay for the dress." The other sales clerk, a portly man with a rage of blue hair, didn't share his coworker's concerns. Holy shit, Keiko, who cares if she didn't pay? You heard what she said, right? Naruto's gonna confess today. The bet might finally have a winner. An ominous chill, much like the one Naruto had experienced earlier, crept up Ino's spine as she registered the clerk's words. Her plan had been to fish out information, and use that intel to discover the blonde's possible love. That had been the whole reason for this shopping trip. But in the face of Naruto's depressing resignation, she had forgotten her goal, and had instead possibly accelerated the end of the bet, with no reward to show for her efforts. Fellow shoppers who had up until now simply been eavesdropping on the blonde's conversation, it was a shinobi village, after all, soon reached the same wordless epiphany. Dear Kami, the end has come, the female clerk whispered as hell descended upon her store. With the speed of shinobi gossip, everyone in Konoha knew within the hour, and by lunch the participants from the other villages and countries knew thanks to handy-dandy summon messages. Konoha was a frenzied mess. Citizens scrambled to reach the various hidden betting sites scattered about the village, and rampant debate, more akin to bar fights, broke out in all directions. The few not driven with shipping madness hid out the storm, taking shelter in designated safe houses created for terror such as this. They made sure to place their bets at one of the hidden betting stations before they did, though they were scared, but they weren't stupid. The bet was worth a lot of money. Most of the Hyuga had sequestered themselves away in their compound, comforting a distraught Hinata and licking the wounds of their defeat. Naruto had clearly said she would confess to him, not her, after all. Poor Hinata was clearly no longer a contender, and the Hyuga were ashamed to find that they had backed the wrong horse. At Ichiraku's ramen stand, Iruka was a catatonic mess. The man considered to be Naruto's brother figure had taken the news of her impending confession hard, and was currently trying to drown himself in his ramen broth. A few desperate Junin and Chunin had tried to wheedle information on the bet out of him, but were promptly knocked out with a stapler and a creatively used correcting pen for their troubles. To add insult to injury, they were splattered with feathers and orange paint, and hung upside down outside of the ramen stand as a clear warning to any other trespassers. The rest of Konoha wisely made the decision to stay clear of the restaurant and Iruka's psychotic strength. Meanwhile, intel agents hiding within Konoha had promptly sent out coded messages to their home villages in the wake of this man-made, or more correctly, Yamanaka-made, disaster. Abort, Konoha Death Con 10. Shitstorm is a go. Repeat, shitstorm is a go. Along with, the end has come, run for your lives. Being a few of the messages sent. But one message in particular was the same regardless of the agent sending it, as decided upon by the cages in the aftermath of the Fourth Shinobi War as being an alert of global importance, code orange, countdown commence. While Konoha degenerated into a hellish nightmare, the likes of which hadn't been seen since the day of youth, the current Hokage Hitaki Kakashi meandered around the village, dodging destruction with the practiced care befitting a shinobi of his caliber. The picture of lazy calm, one might even think he was unaffected by the news of Naruto's impending confession. They would be wrong, so very, very wrong. Internally, the ever-late shinobi was panicking more than ever before. Considering his ties to the blonde on everyone's mind and the close bond they had formed over the years, Kakashi was one of the few, if only people with a chance of determining the object of Naruto's affection before the approaching deadline of her confession. But just because the pieces to the puzzle were within his reach didn't mean Kakashi, with his limited social skills and inability to handle human emotion, was up to the task. Kakashi idly pondered from his current perch on top of the Hokage Tower whether anyone else would learn the horrifying truth he had spent years ignoring. Few others had intel like he did, and he knew that info on the bet was worth its weight in gold. Sakura, his devious little student, was apparently lording her superior knowledge in regards to the bet over the rest of the village. Considering how she had seemingly gone mad with power and was currently using her insight on Naruto's love life to set up a mob-like following at the hospital, it was a good thing that his pink-haired student had never had Hokage aspirations like his other two minions. As he finished reflecting on the insanity of his previously dubbed, only normal student, Kakashi let out a defeated sigh. If Naruto was finally willing to pull out all the stops and confront the truth, he could for once bother to stop ignoring the facts and face reality. It was time to crack the puzzle, though Kakashi knew that he already had the answer. As a pottery store down below caught fire, and shipping cults formed with enough zeal to match a Jashinist, Kakashi closed his eyes to the literally flaming present and dove headfirst into the murky waters of the past. It all began the day of the Genin team assignments. As was the norm, Kakashi had risen bright and early, efficient in his morning routine. Feeding his dogs, putting on his mask, and backup mask, leaving an annoying message for his Mokuton-wielding Kahai, and dodging Guy on his morning run. Then, Kakashi spent a good 3 hours by the memorial stone until he was sure that he was sufficiently late for his cute new students, and made his way to the academy. Pausing before the door that he knew lead to the Hellion who in another lifetime would have been his little sister, and the younger cousin of the best friend he had failed, Kakashi prepared himself for the worst as he opened the looming door. The worst was apparently a falling eraser. Though it would have been easy to dodge the descending object, Kakashi let it hit its mark, clouding his already gray hair slightly whiter with lingering chalk. An obnoxious laugh rang through the near-empty class, a boisterous voice yelling, he fell for it. Kakashi finally raised his head. 3 sets of still so innocent eyes stared back, yet untainted by the bloodshed so common in their profession. The only boy, who had Obito's chin and eyes Okami, was distinctly unimpressed, a prominent scowl twisting the face that looked so much like his into a distinctly Uchiha expression. The pink-haired one seemed unable to choose between horror and laughter, and though her mouth had twisted in disapproval her eyes had lit up with glee. The blob of orange that was shaking with the force of its guffaws from the corner of Kakashi's eye was ignored. He didn't want to see their faces not on someone who didn't even know who he was, and would look at him with ridicule. "My first impression of you is, I hate you." At Kakashi's bland admission, his 2 non-orange students tensed, the broody one narrowing his eyes while closing off his already blank face. Pinky looked like she would tip over the edge into sheer panic, her previously mirthful eyes wide and worried. Finally looking towards his 3rd student, Kakashi was surprised to see not a chastised young girl, but instead a defiant Kunoichi. Her arms were indignantly crossed as she lazily leaned back in her chair, and with that condescending eyebrow raise her whiskered face looked distinctly unimpressed. Despite her ridiculous orange jumpsuit, seriously, who allowed future ninja to wear something like that? And the ghosts of her parents in her coloration and eye shape, Kakashi found himself not somber as he had expected, but impressed. "Meet me on the roof in 1 minute." With a whirl of leaves, Kakashi seemingly vanished. Though he had, to the untrained eye, apparently made his exit, a quick application of genjutsu had hidden him in the corner of the classroom, watching to see what his possible students would do. Naruto, who seemed in awe of the Hitaki's wicked awesome ninja powers, Datbeo, made no move to rise from her seat. Broody instead was the first to leave the room, with his hands angrily stuffed into his pockets and a nonchalant stroll to the door, ignoring the "so cool, Sasuke-kun" from his pink-haired teammate. With a final reproachful eye back at Naruto, who still hadn't risen from her desk, Pinky skipped out of the room, her hair a trailing banner as she raced to catch up to the object of her affections. Once her possible teammates had finally departed, Naruto's face broke into a grin, and she reached up to fiddle with the hite-8 around her neck as she made her way towards the opened window of the classroom. Kakashi was surprised to see the faintest of blushes decorating her whiskered cheeks, and gave a quick rub to his eye before staring again at the strange sight, the angrily named Orange Menace, made with reddened cheeks. As the devious prankster began to pull a rope and hook form the inner pockets of her jumpsuit, Kakashi caught the faintest of murmurs from her still blushing form. Ka-sensei was right, like always. Other people will acknowledge me too, like my pranks. Sticking out her tongue as her face wrinkled into a look of deep concentration, Naruto finished tying the hook and rope together as she leaned out the window. After carefully coiling the excess rope in her left hand, the blonde threw the hook from her right towards the lip of the roof, letting the rope slide through her hands with practiced ease. Carefully flicking down after a calculated pause, she lodged the makeshift grappling hook into place. After giving an experimental tug and seeing it hold, Naruto grasped the rope with both hands as she stepped from the window sill. With easy strength, she began to haul herself up. Before she was out of earshot, Kakashi heard a final few words from the blonde. "Doesn't pranks best sensei ever?" The words themselves were innocent, but with Naruto's tone, which was so gentle and careful, they took on a slightly different meaning. Kakashi carefully ignored the warning chimes in the back of his head, and with ease of practice that comes with being emotionally inept, ignored Naruto's words of praise. That was one can of worms he had no intention of opening. Best sensei ever indeed. Kiba woke in stages, the initial befuddled blinking of his eyes leaving them stinging with tears from the harsh light directed upon him. With a low groan, he attempted to move his jelly-like arms, but was incapable of doing so. Worry beginning to build within him, he blearily scanned his form. Ropes tied with precise care had locked him in place to the flimsy fold-out chair upon which he sat, and an attempted extension of his legs proved that they too were bound. Flicking his eyes to his surroundings, Kiba was disturbed to find only blackness, the bright light fixed upon him ruining his ability to peer into the dark corners around him. Giving an experimental sniff, the Inuzuka was able to identify, after a few sneezes, an overwhelming amount of dust, the faint musk of rotting wood tinged with mold, and "Dango? So you're finally awake. It's about time considering the deadline we're under. I was gonna dump you with a pail of ice water to wake you up, but I guess I'll have to save the bath for another time, you mangy mutt. By the way, you snore." Despite his apparent kidnapper's conversational tone, Kiba was no longer only mildly worried, and as his heart beat an increasingly fast and erratic tempo, the panic began to set in. "That smell, that voice. It was so Kiba," Matarshi Anko drawled, strolling into view as she swung the interrogation lamp around to shine even closer into Kiba's eyes. "I think you know what we want, and you're gonna give it to us. Be good, and we'll let you go. Act difficult, and, well, I'll let you use your imagination for that. But I can give you a hint." Anko leaned in close to the stunned Inuzuka, a sudden glimmer catching the light revealing a kunai in her manicured hand. She trailed the weapon from the tip of his ear around the curve of his jaw to his chin, pausing as she let the point dig in. Wide brown eyes met the crazed ones of his captors as a manic grin stretched across Anko's face. "My snakes are very excited to meet you." A pathetic squeak escaped Kiba's trembling lips in response. "Oh Anko, stop with the bad cop act. He's a fellow Konoha, not a prisoner. I'm sure we can sort this out civilly." If Kiba was scared before, he was pants-shitting terrified now. Because coming into view beside Anko, his scars creating horrific shadows on his face in the limited light created by the lamp, was none other than Morino Ibiki. "So, Kiba, it's time. Tell us who it's going to be. Considering your close friendship with her, you must know who is Naruto going to confess to." Ibiki uncharacteristically exclaimed. An awkward silence descended upon the three occupants of the room as Kiba stared in dumbstruck confusion at the T&I members. "Sorry, could you repeat that? I could have sworn you just said you kidnapped me so that you could find out who Naruto likes." A nervous laugh escaped Kiba as he shifted his eyes back and forth between the unimpressed forms of his captors. "Don't play coy," Anko demanded, cutting off Kiba's laugh. "You were one of her best friends during your academy days, and you routinely go to Kaisa's pet wonderland together. If anyone would have intel into her personal life, it would be you." Kiba had forgotten about his fear with the skill of a true Inuzuka, and was currently giving Anko an incredulous look. Why the hell would I know girly shit like that? Sure, we hung out while we were in the academy, but that was mostly to plan pranks on Aruka. If we weren't messing around or playing hooky, we didn't talk. She was too busy antagonizing all the academy sensei. Anko's lips pursed in disapproval, and Ibiki was watching Kiba with carefully narrowed eyes. Seeing that neither of his captors was buying his words, the Inuzuka pressed on. Sure, we hang out sometimes now, but that was mostly to mess around. We both like animals, you know. If you really wanted to find out who she likes, you should ask Sakura. They're on the same team, and they're both girls. They probably talk about mushy crap like that at sleepovers or something. Granted, Naruto's not the girly type, but still. That's exactly why you would know. Anko exclaimed, indignantly pointing straight at Kiba's face, the closeness of her pointer finger making him go cross-eyed as he instinctively tracked the incoming appendage. Anko is right, Ibiki added. Considering Naruto's tomboy attitude, it is more likely that she would tell one of her male friends about her possible affections. After giving an awkward shift of his shoulders, and looking towards some far-off corner of the room, Ibiki finally mumbled, that. And Sakura is currently holed up at the hospital running a mob. We're not crazy enough to go anywhere near her. Kiba, by this point, was mostly annoyed with his impromptu capture, and with great frustration interjected, I don't know shit. Besides, why do you care so much? It's not like Naruto's about to confess or anything. Anko and Ibiki guilty shifted in place. No, seriously? You guys have to let me go, then I need to go place my bet. Kiba furiously began to yank against the bindings holding him, though his struggles proved to be futile against the strength of the T&I quality rope. Kiba soon paused in his struggles, a ponderous look creeping across his features. Hey, do you guys know who the main contenders are? Kiba asked, turning puppy dog eyes upon his kidnappers. Ibiki shifted uncomfortably for a moment. He seemed to be doing that a lot lately, but the Inuzuka's secret weapon won out. They were masters of the wounded puppy expression. Ibiki made a mental note to bring more Inuzukas into T&I, considering their latent manipulation capabilities. Currently, the top contenders are Sasuke, Gaara, Choji, Killer Bee, and even Kakashi. At that final name, Kiba broke into obnoxious laughter, and Ibiki shared a commiserating smile. It was ridiculous. Kakashi as Naruto's possible love interest, Ibiki smiling. What next? Nara not being lazy. I know, it's pretty ridiculous. It couldn't possibly be the Hokage, but a few people were keen on adding him to the list. Last I heard, a few other names were offered, but those are recent developments. Obviously, in accordance with the original rules, it's been forbidden to interfere with anyone who is a contender. Wouldn't want Naruto to be unable to confess to any possible choices, Ibiki finished. Kiba nodded in agreement, but a key detail or lack of had caught his attention. What about Hinata? Isn't she one of the top contenders? Anko snickered in response. Naruto very clearly said she was going to confess to a man. The crybaby Hyuga princess is indefinitely out of the running. Last I heard, she was holed up in her compound porking back cinnamon buns. I'm pretty sure she's guilting the rest of her clan into comforting her. Girl should just grow a spine, not be an annoying pest. Kiba's face reddened with anger. You bitch. Hinata is not a crybaby. She's wonderful and kind, and you're just jealous of her. She's heartbroken, of course she's upset, but at least she has an excuse. What's yours for being a crazy snake bitch? Why, you? Anko raised her fist menacingly, her face scrunching up in preparation for a heavy rant and possible dismemberment of the Inuzuka, but before she could begin her tirade, a heavy bang interrupted her. The three shinobi jolted towards the direction of the noise, and light streamed in from the now opened door. The incoming light revealed that the building was, in fact, a warehouse, and a pile of boxes in the corner tipped over with the force of the door's opening. A flustered head peeked into the room, tousled brown hair springing up from a freckled face that was surprisingly pale. Boss, we have to let him go, the newcomer shouted, racing into the room to stand at attention in front of Ibiki. His chest heaved with the force of his heavy breaths, the Chunin vest he wore muddy and covered in suspiciously red splatters. Minion number 6, explain yourself. Anko demanded, pointing her finger in the newcomer's face much like she had done with Kiba earlier. The Chunin instinctively stiffened his back as he reported to his superiors. Anko-sama, Ibiki-sama, I managed to escape the Sasanaru vs. Ga Naru brawl in the vegetable market with the new list of contenders. I had to crawl through broken glass from all the broken windows, had to outmaneuver the Sakura gang, had to sell my limited edition, Icha Icha Sensei Sensei. Uncut, to make it out alive, had to. Cut to the chase, Minion number 6. Anko interrupted, eyes narrowed and furious. Minion number 6 gulped audibly. Anyways, the list. With a twitchy jerk of his hand, the Chunin brandished the blood-splattered scrap of paper towards Ibiki. Gaze focused, Ibiki accepted the crumpled paper like it was a priceless artifact, and after smoothing it out, began to read intently. A moment later, Ibiki froze, his eyes riveted to a particular name on the list. Anko, knock him out, Ibiki commanded, carefully folding the list and sliding it within his trench coat. With pleasure. As a predatory smile crept across her face, Anko cracked her knuckles and took a step towards Kiba's wide-eyed form. Wait, what did I do? Kiba pleaded. Ibiki held up a hand to stop Anko from following through with her task, and dropped to one knee before Kiba so that they were at eye level. He raised his hand to place it on Kiba's shoulder, and said in a pitying tone, "You're now a contender, and according to the sacred laws of the bet, we can't inhibit Naruto from possibly pursuing you. But if she confesses to you, you'll have an angry mob after your tail of anyone who lost the bet because Naruto chose you. May Kami have mercy on your soul." With that final ominous end, he stood and strode from the room. Dump him at Ichiraku's, Ibiki called over his shoulder. Anko and Minion number 6 watched their boss exit the warehouse, the door banging shut behind him. The room was once again plunged into near darkness. "Nighty-night, you mangy mutt," Anko leered. The interrogation lamp casting horrific shadows across her face was the last thing Kiba saw before she lashed out with her left fist. After that was only darkness. After their initial meeting in the classroom, Kakashi met his students on the roof. Of course not right away. He gave them an extra 15 minutes to stew in anger, and then reappeared once again in a swirl of leaves. Broody was still broody, Pinky was still quietly furious, and Naruto was. That was awesome, Datbeo. Still very, very impressed with Kakashi. Putting aside the strange and unwarranted praise, Kakashi had the little hellions introduce themselves. The results were worrying. Broody was a psychopath with a brother complex, Pinky a bipolar rage monster of a fangirl, and the orange prankster was apparently obsessed with ramen. If she ever actually became Hokage, Kakashi figured it would be for one of two reasons: either she had yelled and pranked Konoha into submission, or she had infected everyone else with her blindingly orange optimism. Kakashi prayed that she never met Guy. They couldn't have a repeat of the Day of Youth. After dropping the bomb that no, they weren't genin, and yes, he did hold the fate of their entire shinobi careers in his porn-holding hands, Kakashi pulled the old, "Don't eat breakfast, you'll just throw up" line. It was up to them whether they would blindly follow his directions. While Broody sauntered off with Pinky trailing behind him, probably still grumpy about the nickname he had received, Kakashi directed his gaze to the remaining blonde. She was fiddling with the headband around her neck with a look of extreme concentration, and was getting up to leave. "No time like the present. If you're not too busy fiddling with that Hite-8 of yours, I've got a question for you, Blondie." Instantly coming to attention, Naruto dropped her hand like the Hite-8 was on fire, and looked up into Kakashi's lone eye, lips pursed and a furious blush decorating her cheeks. Seriously, what was with the blushing? It's not like she had a crew. No, not going there. You've been surprisingly awesome, incredible, tame. I know your reputation with authority figures. A single falling eraser is positively tame for you. So what's up? Naruto blinked dazedly at Kakashi, and after giving a quick shake of her head, she finally replied with a sheepish grin. "Well, you know, Iruka-sensei was going on and on about respect and all that, and I guess some of it finally sunk in, especially cause, And there was the blush again. I get it, just had to make sure you weren't lulling me into a false sense of security." Naruto beamed at him, her bright grin and squinted eyes making something in Kakashi's chest catch. She may act like Kushina, but she had Minato's smile. "Don't worry, I made a promise to respect you. And so far, you've really earned it. You liked my prank, you called the Teme broody, and you've got sweet entrances and exits. You're pretty high up in my books." With a last cheerful smile at Kakashi, Naruto leapt to her feet before racing to the edge of the roof. The grappling hook she had used before was still in place, and Naruto was just as capable at scaling down buildings as she was at going up them. Kakashi stared transfixed at the hook, before it too disappeared with a flick. Kakashi figured Minato was preparing to strangle him in the afterlife. Shit. The next morning, the bell test didn't go quite as expected. Though he had been considering it, Kakashi didn't use the 100 years of pawn technique on Naruto. He wasn't East, and had no problem fighting Kunoichi, but it seemed wrong to use it on the little girl that apparently thought he would make a good sensei. While Broody was revealed to be incapable of teamwork, and Pinky weak-bodied and willed from lack of exercise and boy obsession, Naruto happily surprised him. Her taijutsu, while not the cleanest, was highly unpredictable and showed great promise. Her trapping skills were also at least high chunin level, and the trap she had set up with a paint bucket and pressure sensor had actually almost caught him. Her genjutsu skills, however, were absolutely terrible, and there was little coordination between her cage bunshin. Her performance wasn't the worst he had seen though, and as a result it was the pink-haired civilian that he tied to the post. Once again rising above his expectations, Naruto put aside her apparent dislike for Pinky and cajoled Broody into helping her feed their teammate. The looks of wonder on their faces when he told them they passed were more heartwarming than he ever could have imagined. The cherry on top occurred when Naruto stayed behind to free Pinky from her bonds, and the two shared a celebratory smile. She had apparently taken what he had said about the importance of teammates to heart. Something within Kakashi suddenly brought up a sobering thought. If Minato was here, he would want Naruto to know how proud he was of her. But he wasn't, and never would be. So the self-made task fell upon Kakashi to complete. Before Naruto could leave the training ground, Kakashi signaled for her to stop with a raised hand. Still looking down at his other hand, from which he read his precious Icha paradise, Kakashi drawled out, "I'm glad you see the importance of teamwork, Blondie. I hope you'll continue to reach out to your teammates. They may be stubborn, but I'm pretty sure an unpredictable Kunoichi like you could turn them around. You really did earn that headband, and should be proud to be a shinobi of the leaf." His piece finished, and feeling rather proud of his motivational skills, take that Kurenai, he wasn't completely inept at human interaction. Kakashi began to walk away from his lone remaining student, becoming entranced with Sango-chan's unrequited love for the Moroku-kun. Don't say stuff like that while reading porn," Naruto exclaimed from behind him. Lazily lifting his head and looking back at his new minion, Kakashi was exasperated to see a now familiar sight. Naruto blushing, one hand lightly tracing the metal insignia of her Hite-8 while the other remained stuffed in her jumpsuit pocket, shoulders hunched and gazed downwards. Blondie, porn is important you know," Kakashi said with an eye smile. "It's a man's most precious possession, the surefire way to his heart." After giving an overdramatic swoon at the wonders of porn, Kakashi dropped the act and gave a smaller, though more genuine grin to his minion. "Take the compliment as it is, regardless of what I'm reading. Acknowledgement comes in the strangest of ways." Resuming his careless stroll out of the woods, Kakashi threw one final jibe over his shoulder. "If you keep blushing like that, you're gonna turn into a tomato." Ignoring the surprised squeak of his student, Kakashi finally exited the training grounds. Part of him couldn't help but worry over the constant blushing, seeing it for the ominous foreshadowing of doom that it was. But that was a problem for another time, and for someone who actually knew how to handle a pubescent girl's emotions. Besides, she couldn't possibly have a crew. No, not going there. If he ignored the problem, it would go away eventually. Momentarily escaping his memories, Kakashi sighed dejectedly from his position on top of the Hokage Tower. All this reminiscing was bad for his health, and he knew the memories would only get worse from here. A younger version of himself would have read some precious Icha to calm himself down, but for various reasons, that wasn't an option anymore. Deciding to take a break from his recapping, Kakashi took in the scenery of his precious Konoha, sure that would bring him back to tranquility. He promptly became even more stressed at what he saw. The hospital looked like a war zone, with scorch marks and long gouges scarring its outsides. Various mish-mash battlements surrounded it, including the smoldering remains of what appeared to be a cannon, along with a deep trench. An attempted hostile takeover had apparently occurred with Kakashi none the wiser. A strange pink flag had been raised from the roof, and banners of what looked to be some kind of flower trailed the outer walls. So much for his only normal student. The rest of Konoha was much the same. Garish swirls reminiscent of those that decorated the Akamichi heir's cheeks were graffitized everywhere near the food-loving clan's compound, decorating many of the village's flat roofs. In the distance, an eerie fog had hidden the shopping district from view. Every now and then, random weaponry would fly out from the encroaching mist, and ominous chanting and drum banging could be heard. The vegetable market, geez, what the hell was going on over there? Kakashi was pretty damn sure that that giant eyesore of a tower hadn't been there before. The worst by far was near the shinobi housing apartments, where various bonfires trailed pillars of smoke into the sky. Shouts, screams, and the distinct clashing of metal on metal could be heard even from the tower upon which Kakashi resided. Amidst Konoha's chaos, a small pocket of resistance was visible, what with it being the only location without fire and/or destruction. Kakashi was fairly certain that the safe zone surrounded Ichiraku's ramen stand, but he couldn't be sure much of Konoha's infrastructure had been moved or destroyed in the wake of this disaster. Luckily, most of the training grounds looked fine, with the exception of number 44. However, that death trap usually had ominous screeching and smoke coming from it, so not so bad. The civilian sector appeared to be untouched as well, showing that there was some consideration afforded to those without the necessary skills to fight. Turning his gaze away from what would later cause a paperwork nightmare, Kakashi did what he did best, and decided to ignore the problem. He could deal with this after he had finished having his introspective emotional crisis. One problem at a time, as they say. Kakashi once again braced himself for the hell within his mind, knowing some of the memories it contained were far worse than the terror Konoha was experiencing now. No one could possibly be in as much trouble as he was. Choji feared for his life. And with this ramen, blessed by the orange staff, I shall bring you into the covenant of our brotherhood. A crazed Suna Junin cried, throwing his arms to the air. The bright orange robe he wore became splattered with broth as he jostled the bowl in his hand. In front of the roof that the Junin stood upon, a crowd of followers that must have ranged in the hundreds cheered, the orange of their robes the only color that was able to pierce the murky mist surrounding them. Choji cleared his throat from his kneeling position in front of the roof. I just heard you guys were giving out free barbecue. This is a bit much for me, Choji interjected, letting out a nervous laugh as the two apostles of the orange on either side of him tightened their grip on his arms. The Suna shinobi in charge of the deranged cult paused in his sermon to induct the Akamichi into the orange and peered down. You don't know what you need, son. That's why we lured you here with the promise of barbecue. The Suna Junin exclaimed. He then projected his voice to the audience once again with a subtle application of chakra to his throat. Before I found the orange, I too was lost. So confused, placing silly bets on any shinobi that had caught her eye, supporting the sinking ship that was Neji Naru. The leader paused in his speech and the audience momentarily ceased their fervent cult worship to bow their heads in memory of the fallen ship. But no longer. The Suna Junin proclaimed, previous vigor returned. With the power of ramen, the chosen of hers, we will divine the greatest secret of the universe who Naruto will confess to. And become the winners of the bet. His balding head caught a trace gleam of light that had managed to leak through the mist, and his eyes contained a dark madness. Shippers were crazy. Choji shifted uncomfortably, aware of the multitude of heads that turned to assess his every move. I actually don't care that much about the bet, to be honest. Naruto's my friend. It feels wrong to bet on her personal life like this. Absolute silence deafened the Akamichi, and a heady cloud of killing intent began to press down on him. Sacrilege! A member of the crowd called out, his rage of blue hair and pot belly the only things distinguishing him from the masses. You're spitting in the face of the most important tradition in shinobi history. Another member cried, sitting on a friend's shoulders so that everyone in the crowd could see him as he chewed out the Akamichi air. The bet has the most noble of origins. I heard that the Sandaime himself sanctioned it, and declared it a matter of global importance. This isn't some petty bet to pass the time, or a joke. By now, the crowd was baying for blood, pressing in towards Choji's captive form. A little girl had just lifted a tomato to throw at the Akamichi heir's head when the Suna Junin that had created the bat-shit crazy cult spoke. Silence, he demanded. Instantly, the crowd abated, turning reverent eyes towards their mighty leader. As a contender for the bet, it is against our sacred laws to harm the Akamichi. The mob began to mutter in protest, but a raised hand from their leader once again quelled them. We took over this shopping district, knowing that it had a betting station. We shrouded it with mist to hide the wonders of our truth from the non-believers, and even still continue to battle the rebels who dare to face us. And now, we will use this Akamichi to our advantage. It is only he who has ever bested the Orange Menace in a ramen eating contest. Let him prove himself worthy of his freedom. His eating of the sacred ramen for our sake will allow us to divine the object of Naruto's affection from the dregs of the broth. And if he fails? Why, then we'll make him regret ever crossing us. Once the bet has ended, of course. The colt hollered and screamed their approval, and Choji was hog-tied and hoisted onto a palanquin supported by a group of brawny Iwa-nin before he could even think of making a break for it. The Akamichi attempted to jostle himself out of the hold of his captors, but he already knew it was a lost cause. Surrounded by almost 200 shipping-crazed shinobi and civilians, in the middle of their mist-cloaked territory, with no allies in sight? He was doomed. He needed a miracle for any hope of escape. As he was dragged off to enter the ramen eating contest to end all ramen eating contests, Choji cursed the Hokage. That bastard was off having some bullshit emotional crisis during Konoha's hour of need, the third apocalypse, even worse than the genesis of the Torah mission. This was what he got for trying to buy Karui a nice dress. He hadn't been able to stomach ramen since that last blasted eating contest with Naruto. This was going to be absolute torture. Kakashi deserved everything coming his way. If Choji was lucky, which he clearly wasn't, but he could hope, the Yondaime himself would come back to life to beat the shit out of the Hitaki for his inept leadership. Naruto had better get with the love of her life, cause Choji was about to enter hell, and something good should come out of this damn bet. The drums of the Orange continued to pound. After the bell test, Team 7 fell into a comfortable pattern. They would meet at Training Ground 7, berate Kakashi for his lateness, lightly train, and complete 1 or 2 D-rank missions a day. Occasionally, the pattern would shift slightly. Sometimes they would do more training, sometimes less, and every now and then they would get a day off. All in all, their time as Genin and Junin sensei was surprisingly peaceful. Naruto's shy disposition faded as they grew to know one another, though Kakashi still caught the occasional blush, particularly when he praised her taijutsu and trapping skills. What Kakashi was most proud of, however, was the developing bond between Naruto and Pai Sakura. They weren't necessarily friends yet, but Naruto's initial outreach, hand-feeding Sakura when she was tied to the post during the bell test, had begun the building of bridges between them. Naruto and Broody were mainly just rivals, constantly insulting each other, and Sakura was still mostly obsessed with the Uchiha who couldn't care less, but hey, you couldn't win them all. Kakashi was just happy to remain slack in his duties and oblivious to the dramas inherent with being the sensei of newbie pubescent ninjas. The wave mission changed all of that. Run! Kakashi screamed from his watery prison. If you leave now, you may have a chance to save yourselves. Damn C-rank curse. Of course life couldn't be easy. But Naruto continued to surprise, risking her life to steal back her Hite 8. Then coming up with another unpredictable and foolhardy plan to save his ass. Now they were hiding out at the bridge builder's home, and Kakashi was finally attempting the wondrous duty of teaching. Great. Naruto in particular was having difficulties with the tree climbing exercise. She certainly wasn't dead last quality, but her skill set did not include the fine chakra control necessary to scale the tree. Sakura had mastered the technique on the first attempt, and Broody had learned it as well after a time. Days later, it was only Naruto in the clearing now, relentlessly charging at the poor tree, her kunai continually scaring its bark. He had left her to her own devices for a while now, but no results were forthcoming. Kakashi decided to offer a few more words of wisdom. This isn't something you can beat into submission to learn, Kakashi called out. Naruto, startled by the voice of her sensei, wildly spun around and flung the kunai she held in Kakashi's general direction. The throw went wide and sailed almost 5 meters to his left. Raising his single visible eyebrow, Kakashi watched as Naruto spluttered and reddened, clearly embarrassed of her less than stellar reaction. I get that you want to learn this as fast as possible, but sometimes you need to take things slow for them to work. Kakashi assessed his student's wary posture and continued. Take it one step at a time, okay? Try figuring out the level of chakra you need before trying to run up the bark. All good things come with dedication, not necessarily with brute force, though that can help, but mostly with subtle, fine details building up to something great. Kakashi gave his blonde student a happy eye smile and turned to leave her to her pursuits. Good luck, Naruto. Anyone would be proud to call you their student. Kakashi was almost out of the clearing when he heard the next mumbled words that stopped him cold. Some things are worth the time. Not just this but people too. A precious person? Kakashi quickly shut his ears to his student's mutterings. He didn't want to dwell on her words, so he hightailed it out of there. Precious person? That couldn't be no. Ignorance was bliss. Ino shivered as she curled in upon herself, the crate she had holed up in not allowing for much breathing room. Her back was beginning to cramp, and there was an itch below her left knee that was begging to be scratched, but Ino didn't dare to make any movements. The sudden clatter of footsteps raced past her hiding place, and Ino tensed in preparation for her possible discovery, but the hurried stranger carried on, and she remained hidden. Letting out a shaky exhale, Ino frowned at her current situation. She, the beautiful Yamanaka heiress, had been reduced to hiding in a random fruit crate, from her fellow shinobi no less. If ever there was an injustice, this had to be it. She was kunoichi enough to admit her mistakes though, and she may have earned their ire. It was she who had accelerated the bet, after all. After the events in the store, most of the occupants had hightailed out, looking to place last-minute bets at the secret betting stations. Ino had escaped along with them, though once the story had gotten out, she had to dodge the pursuits of a group of deranged abarames. They, amongst many others, were less than pleased with Ino's interference, and had decided that it was all Ino's fault that they weren't ready to place their bets. The Yamanaka had been leading her pursuers on a wild goose chase for the past 3 hours, with Shino in particular a hard bug to lose, and her appearance showed it. Her once meticulous blonde hair was ratted and covered in dust, and the purple dress she had put on in the store was covered in rips and streaks of mud. It was her eyes that spoke the most of her misfortune, though wide and haunted, constantly twitching at the slightest of disturbances. Damn it all, she should have just asked Sakura. She hadn't learned anything from her time shopping with Naruto, right? Now that she was finally stationary and not running for her life, Ino took a moment to reflect on her time with her fellow blonde earlier that day. A single detail stood out above all the others. No, it couldn't be. Ino whispered, eyes flickering with her racing thoughts. That gift from so many years ago, with this particular lead. Connections began to form, various clues joining to form a surprising masterpiece within her mind. Holy shit, I know who Naruto's going to confess to. Invigorated by her discovery, Ino burst from her prison, terrifying a passing civilian who had foolishly been on her way to buy beats in the current chaos. Why the hell were you in a crate? The stunned woman asked, clutching her purse like a lifeline as her frazzled brown hair whipped with the wind. That doesn't matter, what matters is that I'm gonna be rich. Fist pumping the air, the previously downtrodden Yamanaka glowed with determination, the dirt and mud lining her skin insignificant in the face of her Uzumaki-worthy grin. Suck it, forehead. Yamanaka Ino still has some fight left in her. Catch me if you can, Shino, Ino purred. Turning on her heel, a banner of dirtied blonde hair and her ripped purple dress trailing in her wake, Ino made her escape, racing to the nearest betting station. What a woman, Shino mumbled. After giving his head a quick shake, the Aburame continued his pursuit, racing to catch up to the cackling Yamanaka. Crazy shinobi and their messed up courting, the civilian woman murmured. After patting down her green dress, she picked up the purse she had dropped upon Shino's surprise arrival and began to walk down the street, carefully sidestepping broken glass and large stand-up posters promoting different ships. On the many signs, graffiti had been used to paint and repaint over the current ship proclamation, with Sasanaru and Ga Naru, the two in greatest conflict. This wouldn't happen if they could have normal relationships and hobbies like the rest of us, she mumbled, using the age-old practice that comes with being a resident of Konoha to ignore the shipping war happening in the square across from her. Shinobi would be shinobi, but she would have her beats, damn it. It's crazy out there, Case-Cage-sama. A haggled-looking Chunin exclaimed, eyes maddened and uniform covered in sand and grit. The Ga Naru supporters are determined to open a gateway to Konohagakure so that Naruto can reach you, and they were even discussing simply pulling her towards Suna, but I don't think it's Konoha we're making contact with. The Chunin absent-mindedly rubbed at metal plate along his arm. The Hiat 8, which was usually a piece of pride for the Suna shinobi and kept impeccably polished, was dulled to a gray sheen, the weathering of the storm raging outside doing more to ruin it than the fiercest of sandstorms ever had. The case cage had his back turned to the messenger, and was staring blankly out of the window in his office. He didn't need anyone to tell him of the chaos Sunagakure was undergoing. He could see it clearly enough for himself. Unlike in Konoha, there were no shipping wars occurring in Suna. Over 90% of the population were staunch Ga Naru supporters, and the few who were not were quiet with their opinions. They were in enemy territory, after all. What Suna did have was an overabundance of support for their national ship. Whether or not the other nations agreed, they would make it sail. Hence the portals to other dimensions littering his village. There must have been only a dozen in total, but those were enough to cause havoc. Suna had never been the greatest at seals. Hello, crazy Jinchurikis that can't sleep without having their souls eaten by a demon, but they didn't lack creativity or effort. It also helped that a shinobi had recently returned with seal schematics he had acquired through highly secretive means. Which is code for eavesdropping on a drunken Naruto as she messed around with seals. Uzumakis always came up with their greatest works when inebriated. The results were mildly horrifying. Most of the attempted gateways to Konoha seemed to open up to blank nothingness that acted like black holes. The post office itself had been sucked up within one. But luckily everyone had been evacuated in time. You would think that would be enough of a wake-up call, but shippers were absolute nutjobs. Sir, the Chunin continued, awkwardly shifting in place, I don't mean to be a naysayer, but I don't think Naruto plans to confess to you. Everyone here is clinging to a foolhardy dream, and, pardon me for saying this, but I think you should tell them so. Before one of those portals brings something here. Gaara didn't reply for a moment, but after a pause, he sighed and hunched in on himself. He turned to face the anxious shinobi before him. Kensuke, I know she doesn't plan to confess to me. I've known since the end of the Fourth Shinobi War. Gaara's eyes went distant as he absent-mindedly murmured to himself, lost in his memories. I saw her looking at him. Once the battle was finished she had this look in her eyes. Gaara traced the wooden grain of his desk, his body hunching in on itself as his voice trailed off to an almost illegible whisper. It was like nothing mattered except for him. I was standing right next to her, but in that moment I might as well have been a ghost. Gaara lifted desolate eyes to Kensuke, and managed a small, tired smile. It was then that I knew I was no match against him, at least in her eyes. No, there is nothing in this world truly left for me. Gaara suddenly perked up, and beamed at the stunned Kensuke while flashing the victory sign. Accept the title of Victor, once I win the bet. Kensuke stared in dazed confusion at his leader, who was wearing an overly large and uncharacteristic grin. But sir, everyone knows you're in love with her. How can you take this so easily? A heavy killing intent pressed down on the Chunin, stopping him immediately in his speech. Gaara's grin had taken on a deranged edge, and he took a menacing step towards the Chunin, his head tilted in a lopsided and crazed manner. Kensuke, if I don't use the possibility of winning the bet as a coping mechanism, I'll fly into a rage, the likes of which hasn't been seen since I held Shukaka. Would you like that to happen? Kensuke furiously shook his head, eyes wide and fearful. I didn't think so. So let's just sit back and wait for this to all even itself out. As for the dimensional portals, our village isn't that good at seals. I'm sure nothing will go too wrong. Boom. Gaara and Kensuke froze. Out on the streets, a nightmare emerged. Oh Kami, no. The end has come, it has come. Incoherent screaming. CRRRRACCCCKKKK bang. Bang, bang. Gaara and Kensuke turned towards the window. The Chunin promptly passed out at what he saw. The case cage stared with wide eyes at the overwhelming sea of orange spilling from the many portals. Lock down, Gaara whispered. Lock down. The Suna Black Ops, who had been hidden within his office until now, raced away to carry out the order. Gaara strapped his gourd to his back, tied a headband around his forehead, and painted dual horizontal lines of black paint on either of his cheeks. With determined eyes, he smashed through his window, and unlike Hitaki Kakashi, confronted the danger facing his village. And so Sanagakure, for the first time in history, underwent a complete and total lockdown. Not from outside threats, no. Instead, from the overwhelming mass of Narutos, many of which were violent, pranking-obsessed demons, that they had summoned from alternate dimensions into their midst. This is what Suna got for eavesdropping on Naruto, the complete and utter warping of their reality. Those poor fools. It was while they were recovering from the wave mission that Kakashi's eavesdropping habit came to really bite him in the ass. In his defense, Naruto had been rather quiet since the death of the fake hunter Nin, who she had apparently met before Kakashi had offered his words of advice. Currently, she and Sakura were sparring in the woods while Bridge Sasuke recovered from the injuries he had sustained defending Naruto. With nothing better to do, he decided to observe their fight, and possibly drop in to offer tips. It had nothing to do with him being worried for his students, nope, not at all. After lightly sparring for about half an hour, the two kunoichi had decided to take a break, and were trading a water bottle back and forth as they cooled down. Kakashi lazily leaned against the trunk of the tree upon whose boughs he now relaxed, idly listening to their conversation below him. "I need to get stronger," Sakura began, eyes focused on some far-off corner of the woods from her seated position against the trunk of a scarred tree, the same one Naruto had practiced her wall walking on earlier. Naruto, who was lying on the grass with her hands behind her head, tilted her head up to look up at her pink-haired teammate. "You will, Sakura," she murmured. After a moment, she wrinkled her nose in distaste. "It's not just for the teme that you're doing this though, right?" Sakura rolled her eyes, and threw a nearby twig at her teammate. "Don't call Sasuke-kun teme, Naruto. And no, it's not just for him." A self-depreciating smile stretched across Sakura's cheeks, and she sighed before continuing. "I was really useless during the wave mission. You, Kakashi-sensei, Sasuke-kun, you all fought your hardest. And I watched from the sidelines, doing nothing." Naruto was silent for a moment, before huffing and rolling to a seated position. Her orange jumpsuit was streaked with mud, and her hair was littered with leaves, but Naruto didn't seem to care. "The past is the past, Sakura. As long as you're ready for the next fight, that's good enough for me. No one's perfect, after all." Sakura smiled in response to Naruto's encouragement, and a comfortable silence fell upon the duo. Naruto busied herself with looking up to the distant clouds, humming quietly, while Sakura simply observed her ever unpredictable teammate. After a moment, a sly and playful look slid onto Sakura's face, and she drawled out, "Sasuke-kun's perfect." An audible groan escaped Naruto's lips, and she threw herself back to the grass to flop onto her back. "Always with the stupid teme, Sakura-chan. Oh, come on, Naruto, even you have to admit he's pretty amazing, the lone Uchiha of Konoha. The Rookie of the Year. He even saved you from Haku during the wave mission." Naruto threw her hands up to cover her face, and moaned like the very thought of Sasuke brought her pain. "Okay, you might not be willing to admit he's a great shinobi, but even you have to realize how attractive he is. His hair is never out of place, and his skin is always perfect. Part of the reason all the girls in our class tried to talk to him was to learn what kind of skin products he used." Sakura finished with distant eyes, reminiscing on their academy days. "Nah, I don't like pretty boys. Not my type." Sakura blinked at Naruto's admission, before narrowing her eyes at the blonde. "Alright, if you don't think Sasuke-kun is attractive, who is? What's your type?" Naruto clearly wasn't paying attention to what she was saying, and absent-mindedly responded, "Not perfect guys. Really attractive guys have scars. Especially on their faces, makes them look rugged." Sakura stared with stunned eyes at her teammate, speechless at the blonde's admission. Naruto, who had been absent-mindedly fiddling with her hite-8, realized after a moment what she had said, her face instantly turning tomato red. Leaping to her feet, she exclaimed behind her to the still stunned Sakura, "Well, would you look at the time? Better get back to Tazuna's, who knows when lunch'll be, hee." After awkwardly shifting in place, eyes darting in panic, Naruto made a break for it, running off in the direction of the bridge builder's home. It took a moment for Sakura to process the previous conversation, but once she blinked her eyes rapidly before jumping to her feet. "Get back here, Naruto. What do you mean facial scars?" Racing off after her teammate, Sakura left the clearing behind, forgetting the water bottle she and her teammate had been sharing earlier. Kakashi sat riveted to his position in his tree, eyes sightlessly staring ahead. After a moment he raised his hand up absent-mindedly to rub at his suddenly itchy left eye, the scar beneath twitching. For the Hitaki, reality threatened to warp beyond recognition. Luckily, Kakashi was used to living with madness. This too, for the sake of his fragile mental health, could be ignored. It's not like Naruto was attracted to men with scars, no siree. That poor fool. Troublesome, Nara Shikamaru murmured from his makeshift table, tilting his head to dodge an incoming kunai. Makeshift, because it was formed out of a few overturned vegetable crates and just large enough to hold the towering stacks of paper on it that threatened to tip with every wayward breeze. The Nara was currently sitting outside of an old cabbage stand, which had been rolled over by an infuriated Akamichi earlier that day. The cabbage stand in question had been one of the many secret betting stations, originally set up because it was in a place Naruto would never willingly go, or could go, considering that ban was still in effect, the vegetable section of the market. Ingenious planning, really, or rather, planned by a genius. Only a Nara was allowed to run a betting station, at least within Konoha. Being too lazy to care about the bet or the outcome of Naruto's love life, it was only they who could be trusted to efficiently run what was considered the most important industry of Konoha with no foul play or leaked information. Which was an absolute drag for the current Nara running this particular stand. The Nara usually took turns operating the secret betting sites, and Shikamaru's luck was apparently absolute shit. Of course the bet had to end on the day he had to run the stand. The stand which was crushed into rubble, so now he had to make do with some overturned crates. To make matters worse, a shipping war was in progress right in front of him, and Tamari, his kind of sort of girlfriend, was the ringleader of one of the sides. Sasanaru. Higane Katestu shouted, popping up from behind the barricade of boxes he and a large group of other shinobi had formed to the left of the stand, blocking the middle of the market. Ga Naru, you absolute moron. Tamari screeched back from her opposing fortress. The Suna delegates and other shinobi on her side were holed up in a considerably more impressive tower constructed from the remnants of a variety of food stands, mish-mashed together into an unholy towering structure. It was the Frankenstein's monster of defense structures, and leaned precariously with every heavy gust. None of the Ga Naru shippers seemed to notice, or if they did, give a shit, too caught up with their feud against the Sasanaru shippers to care. My cabbages, the poor man who was practically comatose beside Shikamaru whispered. The cabbage stand owner was hunched in upon himself, his eyes sightlessly staring at the ongoing conflict in front of them. Shikamaru couldn't force himself to feel particularly sorry for the vegetable businessman. It was his own fault for selling out his stand to the bet to make some extra cash. He should have known that shinobi were crazy, and that anyone even remotely connected to the bet had no hope of coming out unscathed. It has to be Sasuke. Shizune cried out, peeking over the tomato crate she currently hid behind. Genma, who was sharing her crate, threw a paint bomb at the opposing fortress to punctuate her words. Naruto chased after him for years. I heard her, always nagging Shisho for status reports on him. Clearly the concerns of someone in love. Kankuro snorted from his position beneath his sister, his face paint smudged into splotchy purple smears and his karasu puppet a chewed-up mess on his back. His arms, oddly enough, were raised floppily in the air, hanging invisible strings no one else could see. Any Hyuga that could was hidden away in their compound, too busy comforting the Hyuga heiress. You idiot, Naruto loves her fellow Jinchuriki. During the unfortunate Chunin exams, it was she who helped him find his way, and gave him his dream to be Case Cage. The force of Kankuru's declaration caused his arms to shake, which in turn made the tower precariously lean. Quickly readjusting his hands, Kankuro corrected the tower with the chakra strings that were now seen to be the only thing keeping the tower standing. Sasuke was Naruto's first kiss, a purple-haired civilian cried out. Not by choice, Tamari called down. And besides she risked her life to save Gaara from Akatsuki. That's dedication to someone you love. Yeah, well Sasuke and Naruto share an unbreakable bond. Genma called from below, covertly shifting his body to block the actions of the dark-haired medic at his side, hiding that she was in the process of loading a modified Senbon launcher. The Rikudo Sennin himself confirmed their destined bond, and it was their love for each other that broke the cycle of hatred. We heard things very differently. I'm pretty sure the Sennin said they were his reincarnated descendants. That would make any relationship between them incest. Tamari finished with a triumphant smirk. Sasanaru's shippers gasped in unison at the enormous slide against their ship, and as one began to exude a terrifying amount of killing intent. A flurry of senbon flew towards the tower, and panicked screams could be heard as they met their marks. Kankuru, too busy managing his chakra strings, was unable to dodge the projectiles. The poison on the senbon quickly did their work, and as his eyes rolled back into his head, Kankuru fell, the chakra strings emanating from his hands fading into blue wisps, and then vanishing without a trace. The tower began to lean. Kotetsu, the unspoken ringleader, took his place to stand upon one of the crates, and turned back to look at his comrades in arms. They may take our lives, but they'll never sink our ship. Raising a sword that Shikamaru was sure had formed from nothing, the newfound leader yelled in defiance before turning to charge against the Ga-Naru shippers, his fellow Sasanaru shippers racing after him. The Ga-Naru shippers responded to the challenge with violent enthusiasm as when they descended from the monstrous tower. Tamari herself glided down on her fan, before literally crashing into the fray. What followed was chaos. Shikamaru sighed tiredly as the fierce battle broke out in the market square. He rested his elbow on the table, and laid the side of his head in his propped hand as he considered the brawl, before letting out a snort. The Nara closed his eyes, and found himself wondering what the hell he had done to deserve this. What a drag. His self-pitying was soon interrupted by a newcomer. Excuse me, this is, one of the betting stations, right? Shikamaru drug his eyes open and lazily looked up at the intruder who dared to interrupt his attempted slumber. It was a Takigakure shinobi, probably one of the ones in the new shinobi village exchange program. His yellow eyes were twitching from side to side, and his curly black hair was a windswept mess, but his uniform itself was reasonably tidy. He must have escaped the worst of the bar fight style brawls, then. Yeah, got a bet to place? Yes. I'd like to place 2,000 ryo on Inazuka. Kiba? Pretty sure that's his name. 1 second, Shikamaru mumbled, and began digging through the leftmost stack of paper. The Takigakure shinobi looked behind him at the current chaos, awestruck by the mindless destruction. Why isn't the Hokage sorting this fight out? Actually, why isn't he stopping any of this? I was just in the shopping district. There's this creepy mist everywhere, and I'm pretty sure they're doing some sort of cult ritual in there to determine the outcome of the bet, involving a lot of ramen. Shouldn't the Hokage fix this? Or, is he, I don't know, off reading porn somewhere? Shikamaru snorted in response, pausing in his search for the necessary paperwork. I don't know where he is, but knowing him, he's probably having an emotional crisis. Ignoring the yellow-eyed shinobi's garbled, "What?" Shikamaru resumed his search for the paper. Besides, the Nara continued, he doesn't seem to read porn anymore after Jiraiya-sama died. He refused to buy any of the copies under the new successor author. Which is a shame really. I've heard from Ino that they're better than the original series. Suddenly hissing in pain, Shikamaru whipped one of his hands back and stuck the pointer finger of his left hand in his mouth. Troublesome paper cuts, he mumbled. Eventually, the Nara found the paper he needed within the monstrously large stack, and handed it over to the Takigakure shinobi to fill out. He held out his hand for the necessary money, and, after carefully counting the bills, placed it into a box that looked like it could double as a bear trap. As Shikamaru waited for the Takigakure shinobi to finish filling out his bet, he idly listened to a woman screaming as she ran away from the market, yelling something about beats. Lazily he looked out to the square to watch Tamari beat Kotetsu over the head with her fan, admiring the determined cast of her eyes, and the impressive heaves of her bust. Shikamaru absent-mindedly muttered, "Troublesome woman," refusing to see reason. It can't be Gaara. Even the case cage knows that. Besides, Naruto has been in love with someone since the bet was created, just after the wave mission. The Nara's musings on the futility of the woman's he kind of sort of was in love with's bet were interrupted by a sudden boom. The monstrous tower had finally given out, and had crumpled in on itself as it crashed to the ground. Dust suddenly clouded the street from the force of its fall, and Shikamaru coughed and spluttered as he waved away the debris clouding around his mouth. He cast a discreet wind jutsu to clear the air around him, but only on a small scale so as to not disturb his papers. Another shinobi apparently had a similar idea, because the next thing Shikamaru saw was a tornado whipping into formation, clearing away the debris and the pile of bets that had been on his table. Shikamaru stared blankly after the scattered papers, the papers that, if they were to be destroyed, would ruin the betting station's worth of bets that had been created today. The Nara had backups archives for all previous bets, which they kept copies of in each stand, but today alone had amassed an incredible amount which were not yet insured. The voice of Nara Yoshino echoed like an ominous foretelling of doom in his head. Those bets better not be one smudge out of place, or I'll ground you for life. A racing shinobi stepped on 5 papers in a row, slamming them directly into the mud as he attempted to throw his opponent off his back. Akunoichi's wildly thrown kunai missed its intended target, and instead struck 4 of the papers from the air. The remaining mass of paper began to meet similar fates, 1 by 1, and Shikamaru Nara, for the second time in his life, snapped. "My cabbages," the original stall owner muttered once again, oblivious to the Nara that beside him rose out of his seat. Like a raging wave, cloying darkness swallowed the entire market. Within the man-made night, the unleashed beast proceeded to beat the living shit out of everyone present. Apparently, it is possible for a Nara to not be lazy. You just have to drive them over the edge, and let the lingering threat of a mother's punishment hang over their head. Shortly after returning from the wave mission, life returned to normal, or as normal as life can get in a shinobi village. The bonds between his students were definitely strengthening, and many other shinobi had commented on the marked change. Sakura and Naruto's friendship was ever growing, and the pink-haired civilian herself was working hard to be a kunoichi worthy of attention. Sasuke himself was actually commending her efforts. The relationship between the Uzumaki and Uchiha had also cooled considerably. They still weren't exactly what Kakashi would call friends, but there was a newfound respect between them that certainly hadn't been there before. Naruto was less likely to rant or complain about her teammates' brooding ways, and Sasuke was easier going around the blonde. He had even cracked a smile at the last prank she had pulled on the village, an ingenious system of traps that resulted in the entire vegetable section of the market closing for a week due to a variety of chicken-related incidences. It would take months for the stench to clear, and Naruto had been indefinitely banned from the premises of the vegetable market. When asked where she had managed to acquire all the chickens necessary to pull off the pranks, Naruto had come up with some bullshit excuse that she knew a guy from when I busted a chicken smuggling ring when I was in the academy, Datbeo. Honestly, who was she trying to fool? It was still a mystery where she got all those chickens, though. Regardless, Kakashi figured things were finally looking up. So of course the Sandame had to pop his happy bubble of obliviousness. "You want to what now?" Kakashi exclaimed in panic, single eye wide with terror and body as tight as Guy's buttocks in the face of his mischievously grinning leader. "You heard me, I want to start a little wager." Sarutobi Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, and if he wasn't so image-concerned he probably would have propped his feet on his paperwork-covered desk. Giving a light smoke of his pipe, the Hokage's eyes lit with amusement at the sight the shinobi in front of him made. "You've never had a problem with betting before, don't tell me you're chickening out now?" Kakashi cringed at the heavy-handed pun, then sweated under his leader's perusal of his form, hands clenched tightly together behind his back. Part of him wished Naruto was here in the office with him. She would have done something ridiculous by now that would have saved him from answering this particular question. Though, considering the details of the bet, it was probably for the best that she wasn't here. "Sir, I just feel that it would be highly inappropriate of me to, too. Betting on a genin's love life isn't the end of the world," Kakashi, Hiruzen drawled out. Lightly rolling his eyes, he leaned forward to rest his chin on his clasped hands, elbows propped on his desk. "It's a harmless little wager, just between you and me, not to be taken seriously. So I'll say it again, I bet you that Naruto will eventually end up with Uchiha Sasuke. She's already half in love with him." The Hokage innocently grinned at his frozen subordinate, inwardly chuckling at making the Hitaki so uncomfortable. It served him right for always showing up late. "Sir, I may not want to bet with you, but I can tell you one thing, Naruto isn't in love with Sasuke. She would rather give up pranking than be with him. I have no idea where you could have come up with that." Hiruzen pouted at Kakashi, and the Hitaki shuddered at the sight. Old men should not pout. "That probably just shaved 20 years off his lifespan. Shortly after your mission to Wave, Naruto and I had a little chat." The Hokage looked to the side, and Kakashi followed his eyes to a picture on the desk. A little blonde girl was smiling enthusiastically from the frame, pigtails lopsided on her head and dirt smudging her whiskered cheeks. "And you know what she asked me?" She said, "Old man, how do you know if you're in love? You should have seen her, looking so serious she could hardly meet my eyes." Apparently that Haku fellow she befriended on the wave mission left quite an impression on her. Learning about precious people, it really left its mark. And the young Uchiha, rescuing her from certain peril? Naruto seems to take after her mother in more than just personality. Hirazen's eyes gained a misty quality as they lost focus, staring at some distant past. Kakashi didn't think Naruto would be so easily swayed with her affections after all. Kakashi had also rescued her from the demon brothers, and she certainly didn't like him, no siree. No, Naruto had never struck him as the type to moon after little boys. Considering the instability of her childhood, she would probably look for strength of character, steadfast loyalty, and a sense of humor. She did so love her pranks, after all. Sasuke just didn't seem to fit. No, if Naruto did have a crush, it was on someone much, much different. Not to mention Sasuke's newfound appreciation for her pranks. Hiruzen crowed, interrupting Kakashi's meandering thoughts. She told me once, long ago when she was still in the academy, that the best person she knew was one who could handle a joke. She must have known, even then, that they could get on people's nerves, but she almost treated them like a test. A rite of passage, even. One that the young Uchiha has just passed. Hiruzen once again leaned back in his chair, self-satisfied with his clear-cut evidence. Realization hit Kakashi with the force of a falling eraser. But he did what he did best, smile and move along like a green maniac was on his tail. Ma, Hokage-sama, if you're pushing so hard, I guess I'll see your bet. But I think that Naruto won't end up with Sasuke and that's that. Kakashi smiled with a plastic grin, the Sharingan beneath his scarred eye twitching with repressed emotion. Excellent, I'll just have my secretary finalize this bet. Does 1000 Ryo sound good to you? Kakashi forced his head to bob in consent. Good Hitomi. At the sound of her name, the secretary in question strode into the room. She gave off a distinctly stern impression, with her orderly brown bob, wire-rimmed glasses, and narrowed green eyes. She was clothed fully in black regulation ninja gear, and the only color she sported was from the white wraps tying her pant legs. Her hands were occupied by a clipboard, and she tapped at it with a pen that looked like it could double as a knife. All in all, she was rather terrifying, in a grumpy, kill your joy and any hope of reprieve from paperwork kind of way. Yes, Hokage-sama? She clipped out. Take note of a bet made today. No. The bet, between Kakashi and I think Naruto will eventually end up with Sasuke, but he thinks otherwise. On the table is 1000 Ryo. She stared blankly back at the Hokage. You had me reschedule your appointment with the Merchant Guild members, and ignored your current paperwork, so that you could bet on the Orange Men the Uzumaki's love life? Hiruzen smiled cheerfully in response. Exactly. Very well, sir. Her professional tone did little to hide her clear distaste, and she side-eyed Kakashi's slouching form with narrowed eyes, apparently deciding that he was the source of the Hokage's unseemly betting. She quickly wrote up the sum of their conversation on her clipboard, eyes furrowing in thought, absent-mindedly making them sign the agreement she had written up. Eventually, she finished the task, but by now she seemed oddly thoughtful, and made frequent glances towards the paper in her hands. After giving a respectful nod to the Hokage, she pivoted on her heel and exited the room, leaving Kakashi to breathe easier now that the dragon of the tower was gone. I'll take my leave then, Hokage-sama. Kakashi made to escape the room, but Hiruzen motioned for him to stop before he could. I think we can both agree that it would be, for the best if Naruto were to never find out about this little wager of ours. Kakashi inclined his head in agreement, and made to turn again, believing those were Hiruzen's final words, but the Hokage wasn't done. And no foul play, Kakashi. I don't want you sabotaging Sasuke's chances, or trying to speed up the outcome. The bet will end when it ends, and not a moment sooner. This is Naruto's personal life, after all. Of course, Hokage-sama. Hitomi, you caught that, right? Hiruzen shouted towards the hall. After a moment, the muffled response came. Yes, sir. Kakashi finally escaped the Hokage's office, tension fading as he crossed the doorway. As he made his way down the hallway, A peculiar sight caught his attention. The secretary, Hitomi, was currently huddled with a few of the other office workers, all of them discussing a sheet of paper on her desk. Fervent words were exchanged, and Hitomi was constantly making adjustments to the paper. A trickle of unease crept up his spine, but Kakashi shook his head to clear his thoughts. He was far too paranoid. What was the worst that could happen? It was just a little bet, after all. Tenzo was currently contemplating the pros and cons of becoming a nuke nin. Sure, it would mean no health plan or pension and being hunted for the rest of his life, but anything had to be better than staying in the hellish nightmare Konoha had become. To escape the shipping madness, he was currently hiding at Training Ground 5. The training grounds, being one of Naruto's prime hotspots, were the only large-scale locations where no betting sites had been set up. As such, they were a refuge from every other shinobi that had been driven mad by the bet and had swarmed the stations to have their bets placed. Tenzo had been planning to simply wait out the disaster in his apartment, but the brawls going on in the shinobi housing sector had been downright appalling. The last he had seen of them, many of the buildings had been set on fire or configured into death traps to aid in the shipping warfare. As a user of Mokuton, Tenzo knew that it would be him responsible for the majority of rebuilding. But not this time. He was a victim of this damn bet. He shouldn't have to deal with the fallout. Hence the contemplations of possible nuke nin aspirations. The Mokuton wielder was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the approaching shinobi, the shinobi that was indirectly responsible for all of his current troubles. And that's why you should give me a chance. I am a strong, independent kunoichi who don't need no man, but, I love you, and I want to be with you. No, that's no good either. Naruto mumbled to herself, oblivious to her lone audience member who was frozen in shock at the sound of her voice. The Uzumaki was currently wandering the many trails, and was staring with furrowed brows at her feet as she made her way through the training grounds. Tenzo had trouble picking up his jaw at the sight before him, because Naruto was wearing a dress and planning out her confession in front of him, but he soon recovered and called out to the concentrated blonde with only a small quiver in his voice to hint at his unease. Hey, Naruto. What are you doing out here? Naruto whipped her head to Tenzo's seated form, body tensing into a ready position, blue eyes narrowed and terrifying. After seeing who it was, she instantly relaxed, and sheepishly smiled at the previous member of her team. She absent-mindedly reached up a hand to ruffle her short blonde hair. Sorry, Yamato, didn't see you there. That's, a nice tree you're sitting on. And I was, admiring the scenery? At Tenzo's disbelieving expression, Naruto's smile dimmed and she sighed. No, that's not it. I'm actually practicing what I'm going to say to this guy. I've liked him for a long time now, and I want him to finally accept my feelings for him. Naruto made her way over to Tenzo, and sat beside him on the fallen tree. She didn't seem to notice that her dress was becoming slightly dirty from where she sat, or that Tenzo had become as stiff as a board at her sudden proximity. I've been putting it off for so long 'cause I guess I was, I dunno, scared, but Ino convinced me to finally confront him about it. The thing is, I have no idea what to say. How the hell do you tell someone you love them? And make them acknowledge you, too, dat bayo? Naruto turned pleading eyes to Tenzo, who couldn't force himself to turn away from her puppy dog expression. How did you make Senpai notice you? Naruto demanded. What? Tenzo feebly responded. You heard me. How did you get Kakashi-sensei to accept you as a, respectable, mature adult capable of consenting to whatever they wish? Isn't that from the law in regards to relations between shinobi? It doesn't matter what it's from. Naruto exclaimed. She leaned forward and grabbed Tenzo by his vest to pull them face to face, her eyes wide and riveted to Tenzo's. I am freaking out here, preparing to confess to the love of my life, and you're around the answer I need. Please, Yamato, I need to know, how do you make someone accept you as a responsible adult, worthy of acknowledgement? This isn't something I can just charge into like I normally do. Why not? Tenzo mumbled out. Naruto blinked in surprise at Tenzo's question, but narrowed her eyes after a moment. What did ya mean, why not? This isn't something I can just beat up or therapy no jutsu. It's the subtle, fine details that build up to something great. Tenzo stared, considering at the blonde, whose chest was heaving from her previous rant. She twitched under his steady gaze, and removed her hands from his vest to do that odd nervous habit of hers, fiddling with the hite-8 around her neck. Naruto, subtle, fine details aren't you though? I think you should just straight up tell him. You just need to be confident. You can't let this guy spin the conversation around, or get away from giving you an honest answer. So yes, you should just charge into this like you normally do, because from what I've seen, you always turn things around for the better in the most surprising of ways. Naruto gazed back at Tenzo with surprise, before her wide-eyed expression shifted into a sheepish smile. First Ino, now you giving me the push. I really need to do this. You're right, I'm gonna charge in and deal with this like Ray-chan, and make my Hiro-kun acknowledge me. I can't keep holding back because I'm scared of how this might turn out. Naruto was grinning full force now, and Tenzo was almost swept up in the moment. He wasn't thrown off enough to miss one detail in particular, though. Aren't Ray and Hiro names from one of the Icha books? Naruto colored a bright red, and shifted her eyes back and forth as though looking for an escape. Oh, you know, after all that time as Kakashi and Jiraiya's student, I would obviously pick up some stuff, so that's not weird at all. The blonde nervously laughed. Naruto suddenly jumped to her feet, surprising Tenzo at the abruptness of the motion. Thanks, Tenzo. I'm gonna go clean up a bit, maybe even put on some makeup. And then I'm gonna tell him the truth, dat bayo. Naruto beamed back at Tenzo and brandished the victory sign before finally racing away. Tenzo hummed as he pondered their impromptu pep talk. Naruto had noticed that she was dirty. Apparently, she wasn't as oblivious as people thought she was, and things you thought you knew about a person weren't always as they seemed. People were always breaking past the expectations you had given them, because you only ever saw what you wanted to or expected to see. People were always maturing and changing. Hell, Kakashi himself had certainly changed since Tenzo had first known him. He had even burned a copy of Icha. If that wasn't proof of finding maturity in unexpected places that defied all reason, he didn't know what was. Now, to be a nuke nin or not to be, that is the question. Kiba, for the second time that day, woke up in an unknown location after being kidnapped. Absent-mindedly raising a hand to rub the tiredness from his eyes, he froze at the realization that he could move his arms, and looked down. This time, he had not been bound, and was instead seated on a stool. Upon looking up, he was pleased to find not cloying darkness, but the interior of a familiar stand Ichiraku's. So you're finally awake, a voice to Kiba's left droned. Whipping his head to the side, Kiba was surprised to find Iruka, as he had never seen him before. The academy teacher's usually neat ponytail was lopsided, and his chunin vest was rumpled and open, decorated with splotches that Kiba was sure were dried blood. His knuckles were white as they gripped his chopsticks, and the ramen in front of him looked to be untouched. It was the dark bags and haunted quality of his old sensei's eyes that really worried Kiba, though he had never seen Iruka so zombie-like before, and he had had to deal with Naruto during her worst pranking years. Take a picture, it'll last longer, Iruka quipped, not once removing his gaze from his untouched meal. The Inuzuka jumped slightly, embarrassed that he had been caught staring. Sorry, Iruka-sensei. Are you okay? Oh yeah, I'm just peachy, Iruka snipped back. After a moment, he sighed, and finally turned to look Kiba in the eyes. Sorry for being so touchy. It's been a rough day. It looks like you haven't had it so easy either. Takeshi dumped you in here earlier, said you had a run-in with T&I. Kiba looked confusedly back at Iruka. Takeshi? Iruka rolled his eyes with contained amusement, the emotion detracting from his previously ominous appearance. Or minion number 6, as Anko likes to call him. That kid is way too eager to please. A silence fell upon the two, only broken by the consistent sizzle of cooking food as Tucci and Ayama puttered away behind the counter. After a moment, Kiba tensed, his memory finally catching up with him. Oh Kami, I'm a contender. I like Naruto, but not like that. Dating her would probably kill me, if someone pissed with the results of the bet didn't get to me first. Kiba stared sightlessly at the counter, slowly beginning to hyperventilate. His internal pity party was broken by Iruka's sudden snort of disbelief. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Naruto sees you as a good friend, but she thinks you're too immature to be serious relationship material. She also thinks you're a bit of wimp because you couldn't handle competing against her and Choji in their eating contests. Kiba blinked dazedly at this new information. On one hand, he wasn't in danger of being guilted into dating Naruto or killed because she had confessed to him, but on the other he was apparently an immature wimp in the blonde's eyes. A sudden thought occurred to Kiba. Ibiki had said Naruto would probably reveal information on who she liked to a male friend. If Iruka's intel was anything to go by, he was that friend. Who else could it be? Iruka-sensei, you and Naruto are pretty close, right? A panicked expression crossed Iruka's features before he smoothed it over into an unreadable mask. Yes, we are close. Then you must know who she's going to confess to. Kiba exclaimed. Getting kidnapped might have turned out for the best with help from Iruka, he could win the bet. Iruka's expression was stony as he looked back at the Inuzuka. You're treading in dangerous waters, Kiba. I don't appreciate all this snooping people have been doing into Naruto's personal life. But Iruka-sensei, if you try and ply me for information on this, you'll end up like them. Iruka tilted his head behind him, and Kiba turned around to follow the direction he had indicated. Hanging from their feet were 6 orange-splattered shinobi covered in feathers, a sizable lump forming on the closest one's head from where he had been knocked out. Kiba was mildly terrified to note that some of them were Junin. The Inuzuka turned back to meet the blank eyes of his companion and audibly gulped. Scary? Of course. It's your private life too after all, haha. Iruka flinched, but after a moment dropped his blank mask and turned back to his ramen. So, are you going to go place your bet? He asked, attempting to resume the calm atmosphere of the stand that had been present before. The rest of Konoha is a shit show right now, ain't it? Iruka nodded. That's what I figured. I don't have a clue who she's gonna confess to be honest. Besides, if you've become this scary because of the bet, I don't even want to think about how bad everyone else is. If it's alright with you, I'll just wait out the storm here. Iruka seemed to be happy with Kiba's response, and motioned to Tucci. A bowl of miso on me, Iruka said with a small smile. Coming right up, Tucci happily responded. A mischievous smile crept onto his face and he leaned over the counter. It's not going to work, that girl is an unstoppable force. With that final parting quip, the chef retreated to the stove to cook the ramen, entering into quiet conversation with his daughter. Iruka was still pale, but he turned to Kiba and made small conversation, slowly restoring the calm atmosphere of the stand. Iruka, Kiba began, pausing from enjoying his ramen as he looked over to his old sensei. You do know who she likes then, right? Iruka was quiet for a moment, but eventually sighed and tiredly rubbed at his bagged eyes. He looked up at Kiba with an absolutely haunted expression. Yes, I do. And that bastard is finally getting what he deserves. Iruka turned back to his partially eaten ramen and stared into its depths like it contained the harbinger of the apocalypse. Karma is coming. It was after Naruto had returned from her training trip, Kakashi reminisced, that things really turned for the worst. What did I do to deserve this? Kakashi whimpered. Across from him, Jiraiya snickered, smirking behind his cup of sake. The bar the two were currently in was somewhat shady, but it was renowned for being a place of secrecy. Privacy seals decorating each of the booths ensured that the broken kunai was thus the perfect place for Kakashi to converse with Jiraiya. They had much to catch up on now that the Sannin was back from his nearly 3 years-long training trip. I don't know why you're panicking about this, Kakashi. You should be proud of your student. She hasn't just been editing them, either she actually wrote the last one. Kakashi paled. You mean Naruto wrote, Icha sensei? Yep, Jiraiya chirped. His eyes leered over at his twitching companion. She was pretty good at writing the raunchy scenes, wasn't she? And that storyline, the emotion. Absolutely fantastic. It's almost like she had some personal inspiration helping her. Jiraiya paused to take another sip of his sake. She's secretly really proud of it, the Sannin continued, oblivious to Kakashi's twitching form. Doesn't want many people knowing she's the author, but she handed a few copies out to her friends to get their opinions on her writing. That Chunin apparently gave it back. He practically had a conniption, but the Yamanaka with the knockers really liked it. Pretty sure she figured out it was Naruto writing them though. Kakashi glued his eyes to the table between them, his untouched sake reflecting his distraught expression back. I'm gonna be perfectly honest, Kakashi, this situation reminds me of a student I used to teach back in AIM. Had the biggest crush on me, believe it or not. Anyways, I had to leave, and I never really cleared everything up between us. I still regret that, to be honest, considering it's no longer possible for me to. Jiraiya absent-mindedly stirred a senbon in his cup, eyes glassy as he reminisced. Jiraiya-sama, I'm sure Naruto doesn't have a crush like your old student did. This is probably just a phase or even a joke. She loves pulling pranks. I remember Naruto saying that she had a huge prank in the works, and this it was going to fool everyone. This might be it. Jiraiya was subtly leaning away from Kakashi by this point, eyes wide and posture clearly stating that he was weirded out. Probably worried that he would catch Kakashi's crazy. Noticing the Sanin's discomfort, Kakashi took a deep breath and continued in a less crazed manner. So what if Naruto writes porn? Everyone has hobbies. The topic from her last book is a little, well. But like I said, it could just be a prank, or maybe she is like your other student, and it's about you? Jiraiya snorted and turned disbelieving eyes on Kakashi. Wow, you really like living in denial, don't you? And that book definitely wasn't about me. She acts nothing like Nagato did around me. He was always blushing, fiddling with that frog card by the door, giving me gushy eyes. She's more like Conan was with me, to be honest. Liked me as a teacher, and saw me as a father figure. Plus, remember that sparring turn scene between Rei, the former student, and Hiro, the scarred sensei. Come on, who are you trying to fool here? Kakashi vividly remembered that particular scene. When Rei had with her tongue, and Hiro had in all those positions. Oh Kami, Naruto had written that. He had basically gotten a sneak peek into her UAL fantasies. Jiraiya lightly coughed to reclaim Kakashi's attention. I'm not gonna pull the Godfather card because I haven't earned that privilege, and I understand that Naruto is mature enough to decide her own feelings and make her own decisions. But let me make one thing very clear. Jiraiya loomed over Kakashi, eyes narrowed and emanating a heavy killing intent. Naruto is 16 and your current student. She will have no relationships whatsoever until she is at least 18 and a consenting adult. Have I made myself clear? Kakashi frantically nodded. Jiraiya leaned back against his side of the booth with a self-satisfied air. Good, I'm glad we understand each other. Jiraiya smirked. Besides, Naruto's love life is pretty important. I've got a lot of money riding on it. For the rest of the evening they entertained more political topics, such as Akatsuki and the new case cage. Eventually, the Sannin left, dramatically exclaiming that the hot springs of Konoha were calling his name. He predictably left the Hitaki with the bill. As Kakashi fiddled with the receipt, he absent-mindedly reached into his flak jacket's front pocket. Pulling free the book within, he stuffed the bill in his pocket so he could hold the book between his hands. He gave one longingly tender sweep of its cover, letting his fingers pause slightly as they traced the title. After a moment, his entire body tensed. His lone eyes stared blankly at the lurid orange cover. In a single frenzied movement, Kakashi dropped the book to the table and formed a rapid series of furious seals. The spark of lightning that formed between his hands shot towards his previously loved literature, igniting it into a flaming mess. Kakashi stiffly rose from the table, deactivating the privacy seal as he left to pay the bill. Genma, along with Yamato and some of the other Junin who were enjoying their drinks in the various booths, looked up in surprise at the Hitaki's sudden exit. The Senbon chewing shinobi looked back to Kakashi's table and blinked dazedly. Holy shit, did Kakashi just set porn on fire? Genma exclaimed. Yamato smiled. Senpei is finally maturing. The bartender, on the other hand, was not nearly as pleased, and stared dispassionately at the book's smoldering remains. Damn shinobi, always throwing hissy fits. That's the 5th table set on fire this week. Kakashi was heedless of their words, and forcefully relaxed his tensed muscles as he left the bar. Strolling out onto the street, hands nonchalantly stuffed in his pockets and back lazily hunched, he appeared calm and orderly. His eye occasionally twitched, but otherwise there were no indications of his turmoil within. Crazy Sannin, stupid bet. Damn orange idiot? Kakashi murmured. He took a heavy breath, and with a final exhale cleared away his lingering thoughts. Nothing had happened in that bar. Jiraiya was delusional, and his Gaki student was still a tomboy obsessed with ramen, not some fictional crush. In The Broken Kunai, Icha Sensei continued to burn. This is ridiculous. If anyone should be a contender, it should be me. Sarutobi Konohamaru exclaimed, face red with anger as he slammed his hands down on the counter in front of him. To his left, a young Kusa genin snorted, drawing Konohamaru's attention. She seemed familiar to him, but she gave no indication that she knew him. other than laughing at his current situation. He must have just seen her in passing. Ignoring Konohamaru's eyes that were narrowed upon her form, she leisurely raked her eyes up and down Konohamaru's body and gave a petulant turn of her head, whipping her long brown hair in his face. She narrowed her blue eyes upon the list nailed to the wall behind the counter, ignoring the Sarutobi as he spat a lingering strand of her hair out of his mouth. Cool air flowing down from a vent above the list ruffled it, but despite its slight movements, the writing on it was entirely legible. Nowhere on the list was the name, Konohamaru. Peeved, don't make me laugh, a shrimp like you has a snowball's chance in hell. I've heard from a reliable source that she doesn't like little boys. The girl, who couldn't have been older than 12, shot a leery grin at the fuming Sarutobi. Throwing a tantrum like this? Definitely a little boy, but still old enough. I'm 18. Besides, I have a closer relationship to her than any of these morons. I was her student, and I was one of the first to acknowledge her. I should be on the list, not them. In front of the two shinobi, the Nara manning the betting station of the shinobi housing sector groaned. I don't care whether or not you think you should be added to the competitive list. Rules are rules, and you need at least 100 votes cast in your name before you'll even be considered. So why don't you just scram? A heavy killing intent emanated from the Nara, who Konohamaru now recognized as Hideyoshi, a usually mild-mannered member of the Cryptic Analysis Division. Shadows along the walls began to flicker, some even beginning to mist off and coalesce into impenetrable darkness that swallowed the edges of the room from sight. The young Sarutobi gaped at the pissed-off Nara, and the Kusa genin by his side snickered, reaching forward to slug his dejected form playfully on the shoulder. Hideyoshi turned his hard gaze to the young girl, stopping her giggles immediately. Stop laughing. If you keep instigating fights around my stand, I'll blacklist you from competing in the bet. You almost destroyed the betting station earlier when you called Naruhina the worst ship ever in front of that Hyuga. He had finally left his compound, taking a break from comforting that poor, innocent and angelic Hyuga Hinata, and was still high-strung from his loss. If Yugao hadn't stopped him, he would have jukent this place to pieces. Do you want another lost betting station? Do you? The girl instantly paled, and ducked her head down as she hurried out of betting station, her nerves sparking a trail of chakra behind her that disrupted the genjutsu on the door. The Nara snorted and gave a nod to Yugao, who drifted from the shadows at the side of the room. Konohamaru jumped at her sudden appearance, but she paid him no mind as she reapplied a stream of chakra to the exit with a wave of her arm. Afterwards, she lifted a book from her pocket and began to read, willfully ignorant of the chaos around her as shinobi raced in and out, placing their bets. Konohamaru was about to leave the stand, when the lurid orange cover of the book in Yugo's hand caught his eye. That was a limited edition copy of Icha Icha Sensei Sensei, uncut. How did you manage to get a copy? The author only ever released 6 of them. And since when do you read Icha Icha? He exclaimed, eyes riveted to the book as Yugao lifted her eyes to inspect him. She casually flipped the book shut, and slid it into a pouch on her thigh. I was monitoring the vegetable market earlier. She drawled, and withdrew her katana from its holster to idly polish it. Konohamaru gulped as the metal gleamed in the light. And Chunin was about to be crushed by an enraged Sasanaru fan. Idiot Chunin insinuated that the Uchiha had too much of a brother complex to ever notice his teammate or have even caught her eye. In exchange for getting him out intact, I took his limited edition novel. He claimed he received it from Naruto of all people, but I find that hard to believe. The purple-haired sword mistress lifted her eyes to the roof, and smiled in reminiscence. I didn't plan on reading it just yet, but, well, I can relate to it. Besides, the writing is actually quite good. And the relationship between Rei and Hiro, their real and pure love, it's beautiful. The scenes are pretty great, too. Konohamaru choked at Yugo's final words, but she had apparently had enough of their conversation. With a final polish of her blade, she slid it back into its holster and pulled out her book again, absolutely entranced in her reading. Konohamaru absent-mindedly noted that she was about halfway and she hadn't reached the crazy plot twist yet. Then, behind the counter of the betting station, the Nara in charge cleared his throat. He pointedly nodded towards the exit, the menacing shift of shadows highlighting his impatience. Grumbling at the clear dismissal, Konohamaru left the stand, shivering as the chakra fueling the genjutsu washed over him. A quick glance backwards revealed a smooth, unblemished wall. Naruto's ineptitude with Genjutsu, and the fact that she lived closer to the red light section of town, made this spot a perfect hiding place for one of the betting stations. Currently, it wasn't quite so hidden. Shinobi were constantly streaming in and out of it, blurring the fake wall of the apartment building that concealed it. There wasn't time to be careful with entrances and exits though. The bet would end today. Konohamaru grouchily sauntered up a building to his left and perched himself upon a duplex next to it. With a frown, he observed the chaos before him. The Shinobi housing sector was comprised of over a dozen apartment buildings clustered around a variety of houses and condos gradually staggered in height. All were flat-roofed, and the range of levels allowed Shinobi to easily navigate the ninja highway. Currently, those same apartment buildings had become absolute death traps. Some moron had come up with the astounding idea to rig his room, and by extension his apartment, so that no one could sneak in to find his collection of intel on the bet. Of course everyone else decided to do the same. The result was a series of insanely trapped buildings that were constantly in danger of exploding at the slightest of disturbances. A few shinobi had even decided traps weren't a good enough preventative measure, and had simply set fire to their evidence and their buildings. Columns of smoke pillared into the air, and Konohamaru was disturbed to note that many shinobi were still attempting to find info within the burning and/or trapped buildings. It didn't seem to be going so well for them, if the screams, fires, and clanging of metal was anything to go by. Konohamaru was broken from his musings by a sudden presence behind him, and with a quick shunshin he was in front of the intruder with a kunai to their throat. "Holy shit, put the kunai down. I just want to talk," the Kusa genin from earlier exclaimed, her eyes panicked as they locked onto the kunai gently pressed to her jugular. The Sarutobi stared consideringly down at her. She was at least a foot shorter, the midget, before slipping his kunai back into his side holster. He narrowed his eyes upon her tensed form, and crossed his arms indignantly. "What do you want, brat?" he drawled. The genin had been nervously rubbing at her throat, but at Konohamaru's words she puffed up, going red in the face as she exclaimed, "I'm not a brat, I'm Nana, genin of Kusa." Konohamaru waved away her words. Yeah, brat cut to the chase. Nana scrunched her face as though she was about to yell, but she stopped herself before she could, exhaling to calm her rage. She pierced Konohamaru with her pale blue eyes, cold as ice. "I've got a bit of a proposition for you," she drawled. "Everyone knows you're bonkers for that blondie, but no one, including me, thinks you've got a shot at winning. I'm mostly pissed because I know I don't have much of a chance to win the bet. I don't know anything really personal about Naruto except what I've heard in hearsay." Konohamaru narrowed his eyes. "Where are you going with this, midget?" The genin pursed her lips, but bit out an answer. "I want you to help me rig and steal the betting papers from the betting station." Konohamaru froze, then broke out into raucous laughter. "Oh Kami, you're insane." He laughed, bending over with the force of his guffaws. Nana's face reddened. "No, I'm not. You want to try and steal bets from a psycho Nara and his sword master guard? Of course you're crazy," Konohamaru exclaimed. "Ever since the vegetable market betting station was lost, the other stand managers have been completely psycho. Did you see the freaky crap he was doing with the shadows? That's super powerful stuff. The bet has driven some of the Nara to not be lazy. They're terrifying." Nana anxiously stared down at her hands as she fiddled with the long sleeves of her fishnet undershirt. After a moment, she stilled her hands and defiantly looked back up at the amused Sarutobi. "You want your name on that list, right? Then you have to fix some of the bets to be about you. While we're at it, I'll scope out who certain people have bet on. I don't know much about Naruto, but I do know who would." Konohamaru had stopped breaking out into snickers and was now considering her carefully. Nana wasn't very intimidating. She had a cute button nose, a round face that still had traces of baby fat, and she was tiny. The fishnet sleeves she had been fiddling with earlier were at least a size too long, and the green shirt she wore over top hung baggy on her. It seemed to be in a near perpetual state of falling off her right shoulder. Add that to her large black ninja pants that had been wrapped to hell and back to keep them in order around her ankles, and she seemed like a child playing dress-up. But her gaze was determined, and Konohamaru found himself impressed despite himself. On closer look, she did seem kind of familiar though. "Alright, I'm somewhat interested in your plan. But how do you plan on tricking a Nara? They're geniuses, and right now the one at the betting station is on hyper alert. Don't even get me started on Yugao, she was in Anbu. Nana smirked. I've been in Konoha for the past month on the Shinobi Village exchange program, and this betting station is one of the places and people I've been scoping out. There's a ventilation shaft leading in from the roof that opens right in front of the list, behind the counter. No one really pays attention to it because it's a sheer drop, and too tiny of a gap for any normal person to fit. Nana smirked. I, however, am very tiny, and I have some sandals that allow me to stick to surfaces without chakra. I can sneak down the vent, get the info, and get out, lickety-split. Do I need to repeat myself? There is a high-strung Nara in there and an ex-Anbu Black Ops. Not to mention all the people racing in and out to place their bets. Someone is going to notice you. Nana flipped her hair, smug as a cat that had caught the canary. I'm not stupid, like some people, Nana drawled, ignoring Konohamaru's indignant, hey. The betting stations have lookouts that monitor for threats they're usually hidden, but I managed to sneak a peek of one of them earlier this week. If you hanged into him, and gave Yugao and that Nara Hideyoshi, I think his name was a bogus reason to put the station on lockdown and leave, I could sneak in and do my part. Konohamaru stared at her with wide eyes. This is actually starting to sound like a decent plan. But who's the guard? And what kind of danger could actually lure them out? The Kusa Genin huffed. Guy named Aoba, you know him? At Konohamaru's nod, she continued. As for the danger, well, that's why I picked you. I've heard rumors that Naruto has some sort of waijutsu, and that she taught it, along with her signature techniques, the Rasengan and the Kage Bunshin, to you. Besides, you're her previous student. You know her, and how she acts. I figured if Naruto were to appear, asking why there's a genjutsu on the wall of one of the apartment buildings. Well, why don't you let that little head of yours think for once? It would be absolute chaos. The Sarutobi was in awe. Holy shit, this plan isn't half bad. And, well, it is the last day of the bet. If I was going to do something crazy, now would be the time to do it. His considerate expression morphed into a look of confusion that twisted his mouth into a frown. He narrowed his eyes on the smug girl in front of him. Wait a second, what did you say before about my head? Not important, Nana interrupted. Suddenly nervous, she anxiously met Konohamaru's eyes, and absent-mindedly scuffed her shoes on the tiling of the roof. So, are you in? The Sarutobi's growing grin, which was lit up with light from the flaming buildings around him, was answer enough. Ino slid to her feet, coming out of her previous role and sprinting just in time to dodge the cloud of insects that had swarmed her previous position. Chancing a quick look over her shoulder, she grinned at what she saw. The numerous bugs that had attempted to catch her had instead been caught themselves. A careful application of a sticking seal to thin streams of gauze from the overhanging roof Ino had been under before had trapped them to the hanging threads. But Ino didn't bask in the victory, and pushed on, knowing that the trap wouldn't slow down Shino for long. She continued to race down twisting alleys, occasionally circling around various brawls. Her dress was no longer purple. Instead, it had become an off-color brown. On top of that, she was covered in soot from a backfired fire jutsu she had used in an earlier escape. Despite this, an enormous grin was stretched across her cheeks. This was the most fun she had had in years. After she had escaped the fruit crate, Ino had led Shino on a merry chase, eventually losing him near the Shinobi retail section. She had then looped back towards the vegetable market to place her bet, but by the time she had arrived she was already too late. A thick, impenetrable darkness had shrouded the market, and Ino hadn't been crazy enough to enter the terrain of a clearly psychopathic Nara. Making the detour towards the no longer viable betting station had cost her, and she was once again on the run from the predatory Aburame. But Ino would prevail, despite the, quite frankly, awful odds. She went through a quick count of the different betting stations as she weaved through a series of crumbled buildings, idly powering chakra to her legs to jump over a particularly large clump of rubble. The hospital wasn't an option. Forehead had apparently formed some sort of mob following to help her control that one. The Shinobi housing sector station was surrounded by fire and death traps. No way was she risking that shit show. There were probably a few more sites that were safe, but Ino wasn't privy to the locations of all of them. No, the only site Ino knew the location of was the one she was on her way to. The betting station in the shopping district. A kunai suddenly streaked past her head. shedding a few of her blonde hairs to reveal the senbon she had nestled in the strands. Ino lifted her head, the attack breaking her from her thoughts. "Shino!" Ino exclaimed, a laugh escaping her lips. "You're gonna get it now. No one messes with my hair." Ino whipped around, somersaulting as she did to avoid a flurry of senbon. She rose again to her feet, a katana she had nicked from a passed-out chunin earlier sliding into her left hand from the makeshift holster she had tied across her back. But it wasn't Shino who had thrown that kunai. No, it was. "Girlie, you're gonna wish I was your buggy boyfriend," Mitarashi Anko drawled, idly spinning a kunai around her right pinky finger as she advanced towards the now frozen Yamanaka. A myriad collection of other T&I shinobi began to step away from various hiding places, forming a loose semi-circle around the Yamanaka heiress. "You were the one that started this whole mess, so in a way it's your fault this is happening." Anko smirked, pausing in her steps and lowering the kunai to her side as she placed her other hand on her hip. "You're gonna tell us everything you know, or not being able to place your bet will be the least of your worries." Ino ignored the snickers from Anko's minions and analyzed the situation. It seemed hopeless, the odds insurmountable. But Ino wasn't about to give up. She knew she could win the bet. She wasn't about to let anyone, even Mitarashi Anko, get in the way of her goal. She just needed some time to prepare an escape. Once she made it to the shopping district with its murky mist, she would probably be safe, for a relative meaning of the word. But anything had to be better than facing off against Mitarashi Anko and her minions. "It's kinda weird that you would expect me to know," Ino nonchalantly drawled, covertly lifting her right hand to slide through her knotted locks. "Naruto's such a tomboy, she would probably tell a male friend if she had someone she was interested in." Anko snorted. "That's what we thought, but the Inuzuka who was the most likely option was useless, and any of her male friends she would have told ended up being contenders for the bet anyways." Ino hummed, idly staring at her right hand's nails like she was unaffected by the vultures slowly closing in for the kill. "What about Iruka-sensei? They're always going to that ramen stand together." Anko, surprisingly, flinched. "Iruka is terrifying. He took out one of Kiri's Anbu Black Ops, for Kami's sake. Left him out on the street tied up like he was a pig ready for roasting. I'm not crazy enough to mess around with that psycho nut." The Yamanaka took a moment to wonder what the world had come to that Anko of all people was calling Iruka-sensei a psycho nut. The world really was ending, wasn't it? Ino rubbed her free hand's fingers together, the slight trembling of the katana in her left belaying the nerves she felt but wasn't allowing to sneak into her voice. "I can see why you wouldn't want to mess around with him. But why me? I know as much as you guys. Naruto is a tough nut to crack." The trenchcoat-clad Kunoichi began to stroll towards Ino, a smile more like a sneer stretching across her face. "Oh, honey, we're doing this to you because you do know something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be running towards Cult Central. Now stop stalling, my snakes are so anxious to meet Ah." Ino didn't let Anko finish her sentence, aiming for the element of surprise. The senbon that she had slid out of her hair, and the strand of her golden locks that she had rolled onto it, stabbed into Anko's throat. They made an excellent medium for her mind transfer, and Ino launched her consciousness at the snake summoner with a speed she had never reached before. Quickly taking control of Anko's body, she whipped the senbon that the T&I member had been holding in her hands at the numerous minions. Two, caught by surprise, were taken out by hitting a nerve on their throats, but 4 attackers still remained, apparently better practiced at avoiding Anko's commonly thrown weapon of choice. Must be the senior members of the minion squad left then, damn it. One, wearing goggles, made a break for her unconscious body. Ino heaved her possessed form across the distance, parrying his swinging kunai with one of her own. Lashing out a leg at his feet, she was unsurprised when he jumped to avoid her assault, but was ready. She snapped the same leg back around to into his stomach, sending him careening to the ground in a winded mess. Turning to her left, she diverted a punch from the second attacker with an upward swipe of her forearm, but was unable to dodge his kick to her right side. Anko's body was pushed harshly to the left, but Ino fell into a roll to reduce the ground's impact and stumbled to her feet. She sprinted back towards her body, which the chunin that had kicked her away was currently lifting up with the help of one of his remaining comrades. "Stop right there," the one on the left called, and held a kunai to the hair of Ino's body. "One move and you'll be a baldy." Ino wasn't about to give up just yet, and employed the master of all diversion tactics. She ripped open Anko's coat and fishnet shirt with one quick jerk of her kunai-wielding hands, and continued running to her captive body, regardless of her now free assets. The two holding her body gaped back at her, and the female one on the right whispered, "I have seen heaven, and it is glorious." Ino punched her square in the nose, before spinning towards the second Chunin and delivering a quick chop to his neck. Ino smirked. Absolutely typical. Anyone would fall in the face of Anko's key qualities. Nobody messes with Yamanaka. No sudden movements, the fourth minion whispered as he held a senbon to the neck of the possessed Anko. A quick peripheral check revealed that he had trained another on Ino's unconscious body with his free hand. If she tried to return to herself, he would knock her out before she had time to retaliate. The Chunin she had kicked in the stomach at the start was now stumbling to his feet, though he still breathed heavily from having the air knocked out of him. The one she had punched in the face also rose, still blushing as she cradled her bleeding nose. The fourth, who she had chopped the neck of, remained unconscious, but it didn't matter. She was surrounded. The two that had just re-entered the battle again picked up her body, and again held a kunai to her unconscious form's hair. "So, Yamanaka?" her senbon-wielding captor whispered. "Are you going to tell us what you know? Be careful what you say. We're T&I, and we'll know if you're lying." Ino was trapped, but she didn't want to give up her information. They hadn't earned this information on the bet. She had, but, her hair. Going once, going twice, the Chunin sneered. The one with the bleeding nose raised her hand to end it all. Ino closed Anko's eyes. Bzzzzz. Ino opened her eyes, just in time to see the two that had been holding her body begin to lean to the side. The Chunin that had been holding the senbon to her neck teetered as well. The insect that had bitten him flew away, its task accomplished. The Chunin's eyes were wide and panicked, but he was unable to do anything as he lost control of his body, just like his fellow minions. Ino felt her possessed form begin to droop, and made the split-second decision to return to her falling body. Ino expected to meet the ground like her currently falling captors, but a pair of steady arms caught her around her shoulder and waist before she could. Ino lifted her eyes to meet her rescuers. The glasses he usually wore were missing, but otherwise a streak of dirt on his face along with a light singe to his coat were the only indicators that he had been chasing Ino for most of the day. "Couldn't let them do it," Shino whispered. Ino found her eyes riveted to Shino's, the flecks of green in the brown of them catching the light. "Why?" she managed to fumble out, the tension of the moment pressing down on her. "Why? Because I couldn't let them go after the woman I've been chasing." He lifted his hand from Ino's waist to nervously scratch at his nose. "Besides, I really like your hair," he mumbled. Ino was quiet for a moment, before shining a small but genuine smile at her savior. "Hey, Shino?" "Yes," he instantly replied, shifting her in his arms to that she was more comfortable, their faces even closer than before. The Yamanaka's smile took on a crooked edge. "Would you like to come with me to win the bet?" The barest hint of a smile was visible underneath the collar of his jacket, but Ino could see it easily from this close distance. "It would be my pleasure." "Why?" "Because you are an incredible woman."